The Magicians Podcast is brought to you in proud association with the Magic Circle, Alakazam Magic, and Gigio.
I think the reality is, copying another performer is a good thing. It is part of the creative process.
Yeah. Yo, it's my life, my time, my rights, my rhymes, my grind, my struggle, hustle, sweat in my blood too. I'm ready to smell fear, I smell a lot. My competitors fled scared, cause they smelled I was hot. I want it all, excess, the sex, much success, stress us. I want it all, no less, so come on.
You're listening to the season finale of the Magicians Podcast with Derren Brown. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Richard Young. I am your host. I sincerely appreciate you tuning in to this final episode of the series. If you had told me 2 years ago and 72 episodes ago that our third series would end with Derren Brown, I would have never believed you. You are in for a real treat today. Those of you who listen to the podcast on a regular basis know that I'm a huge Derren Brown fan. I've followed his career and loved his work very much over the last 15 years. As a result, this was a surreal experience to visit his house and sit on his sofa and talk to him for over 2 hours about all the things I've watched him do. I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, and I sincerely mean that, but I don't think anyone has ever produced an interview with Derren like the one you are about to listen to. He is talking to the magic community here, and I think you're going to absolutely love this interview you are about to listen to. As this is the end of the series, there are a few loose ends for me to tie up, the first of which are a few thank yous. I would sincerely like to thank my three sponsors, the Magic Circle, Alakazam and Gigio. The Magic Circle is without question the best magic club in the world, and if you've never joined it, you should really look into doing so. It's great fun. I go there almost every Monday night and have a fantastic time, and if you're scared of the audition, you don't have to be. Remember, you can become an apprentice. I would also like to sincerely thank Martin Rowland. He is the genius behind Gigio. You will never ever forget that jingle, and if you've seriously never gone and tried Gigio, go and do it now. It really is a fantastic product. It saves me a lot of time every week, and he's just a great guy, and that free 30-day trial awaits you at their website right now. Thanks to Alakazam Magic, Peter Nardi, of course, in particular. As this is the end of the series, Peter is offering all podcast listeners an amazing deal this month. If you go to the Alakazam website and you order anything, when you get to the checkout, enter the code MPC10 and you will receive 10% off your order. That's just as a thank you for being a podcast listener, and thank Peter. It's not from me. The money's coming out of his pocket, but there you go. There's another reason to visit Alakazam. I'd like to thank my friend Rob James. He helps me behind the scenes here with the podcast almost every single week. He proof listens to every single episode, and he helps me with a lot of the questions, and is also behind a lot of the humour, which I hope you enjoy here on the podcast too. For the second half of this series, I have been talking on a regular basis about the upcoming ITV1 show, The Next Great Magician, which, as an odd coincidence, Derren Brown is an exec producer of. Well, it's finally been given an air date. Put this in your diary. Sunday, the 6th of November at 7 p.m. on ITV1. The very first episode of The Next Great Magician will air. Here's a fun fact. On that very first episode, there are 3 magicians who have been here on the Magicians Podcast. Can you guess who they are? I would love to know if you can guess who they are. If you can, drop me a tweet. We're on Twitter at Magician Podcast, or you can send me a message through our Facebook page. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/Magicians Podcast. I would love to know who you think they are. I'd love to know your guesses. Let me know. Don't disappear too quickly at the end of this interview. I've compiled some of our best memories from Series 3 in a little montage, which I think you will enjoy. Sincere thanks to all of you who left questions for Derren on our social media pages. I'm sorry I wasn't able to ask them all, but I have asked as many as I can here in this interview. During the month of August, I very much enjoyed watching the Olympic Games on television, and I was watching 2 pundits on the BBC discussing gold medal athletes, and one of them said that a gold medal athlete is not just an incredible athlete, they are an incredible human being. They will tick every box. They will be intelligent, they will have great genetics, they will have an incredible work ethic, and of course, they will be very fit and a great athlete. Well, I think Derren Brown is our equivalent. You are about to meet an incredible human being. So sit back, relax, and enjoy 2 hours in the company of the incredible Derren Brown. A wise man once said, you should never meet your heroes. Well, I've ignored that today.
I say you should never meet Richard Wiseman.
Yeah, that's true. Derren, thanks so much for doing this. I just want to mention, first of all, when I announced to my listeners that you were going to be on the podcast on our Facebook page, we got 98 likes, which is a big record for me. I was really pleased about that.
Nice.
I've got to say, I was a bit annoyed.
Out of how many is that, though? Because, I mean, it sounds a lot, because I thought you were going to say 98%, and then you didn't. You said 98 likes. And if that was out of
it was 11.
Anything more than, I'd say, 99, I'd be a bit disappointed.
There's 1,100 likes on the page, but maybe everybody didn't see it, to be fair. Actually, to put it in perspective, I was a bit annoyed, because my mate Jimmy, he's a big fan of yours, by the way, the same day he announced he was getting engaged, he got 350 likes.
Well, there you go. That puts it into proportion.
Yeah, it does really. But so I want to, first of all, before we start talking about sort of all of your amazing things that you've done, I just want to sort of give you a bit of an insight into how closely I followed your career. So when I was 14 years old, I went to international...
And you're what, sorry, you're like 16, 17 now?
I'm 32, don't tell me.
Okay.
I went to the International Magic Convention, and it was a big trip for me, and it was Jimmy, actually, who I just mentioned. We went to London, and on the Friday night, you did your lecture, and...
International?
Yeah, international.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it was the only lecture I've done, I think.
1999, I think it was.
Wow.
That was the year. And you did all your stuff. We had no idea how it was done. And then you didn't tell us how it was done either, which was a bit annoying, to be honest. But yeah, from there, then I've spent my birthdays at your shows and bits and pieces. So this is a real honour for me today to sit with you.
That's amazing, and Robert. That's really flattering.
Thanks. So I've been doing my research, and I understand you're the son of Chris and Bob.
Chris and Bob, yes.
Here's something I want to ask you right from the top. And that was, they sent you to a very nice school, and obviously you also went to uni as well and did German law. How did your parents react when you told them you were going to have the life of an artist and basically be skint? What most artists are, really, aren't they?
They are, yes, they are. Well, actually, it was quite a formative moment. So my mum did her A-levels, but that was it. And my dad left school when he was probably about, I think, maybe sort of 14, 15, something like that. So neither of them had done any sort of tertiary education, and no one else in the family had either. So I was the first person in our kind of, family history, I think, to ever go to uni. So there was no pressure on me, even though I was basically doing law. Law was the main part of the degree. And I realised at the end of my first year that everybody else studying with me felt enormous pressure to do well, not for themselves, but for what their parents were going to say if they didn't. It had never struck me that was a thing, that parents would ever do that. And I wrote a letter to my mum and dad at the end of the first year, just saying, thank you for never trying to point me in any direction other than simply, you just do what you enjoy. So that was lovely. And then I came home at the end of my first year, I think, and said, look, I'm not going to be an international lawyer, which is where the law in German was going to take me, which is what I was studying. I think I'd be a magician. And Mum just said, that sounds lovely. And then it was actually enough to make me think, okay, maybe that was a bit rash, maybe I should rethink that, maybe I should think more sensibly. But yeah, that was her reaction. Sounds lovely. And it's always struck me as a very impressive thing, because you don't, by its very nature, you're not really aware that that's even a choice that they've made, and maybe it wasn't even a conscious choice for them, but I imagine it is at some level, isn't it? If you're going to instill that in your child, you've probably thought about it at some point, and it really it was amazing thing.
What point did you realise that you did want to be, it was hopefully going to be a full-time thing for you? Is this around the time you're writing the books as well, and you're starting to create your own magic rather than just learning other people's? Well,
first of all, in my first year or so, I saw a hypnotist called Martin Taylor at Bristol University, and it was a phenomenal show. Because I hadn't seen hypnosis before anyway, and I think if you see a half-decent show, it's amazing. But it wasn't making people look stupid, but equally it was hilarious, and I was on the edge of my seat with kind of laughter and amazement, but it wasn't really at anyone's expense. And I left that night thinking, right, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna learn how to do that. And I was kind of I was very insecure. I'd had a schooling where I wasn't exactly bullied, but I was very intimidated by the sportier, older kids. Very unusual for a magician to have this kind of story. So I sort of overcompensated when I sort of got to sixth form and then into uni where no one knew me. I became a real sort of attention seeker. I was always trying to be funny and doing impressions of people and caricatures of people. And so I had a lot of that rubbish in the air. And then, so I think seeing a hypnotist, A, the kind of, I could perform, and B, that weird thing of control that it gives you, particularly over exactly the sort of laddish types that really kind of intimidated me before. So it ticked a lot of boxes at that age that I think were really appealing. So that's the end of my first year. So I'm like, took a year out. So I'm 19, 20, and that was not 1920. I was age 19 or 20. I'm not that old. And yeah, that was it. I came home, decided to do it. I was walking back with my friend Nick Gillum-Smith, and I said to him, I'm going to do this. And he said, yeah, I'm going to do it too. And I said, no, I really am going to do it. And then I spent the rest of my law and German degree doing the odd sort of gig, mainly university gigs, mainly hypnosis. And then somewhere in there I discovered magic. A friend of mine was a close-up magician, and he showed me some things, and then I got a book on it, got the Mark Wilson book. And by the end of my degree I was doing more magic than hypnosis, and realised I signed on for a bit, but I realised I could just about scrape it together as a living.
You had a couple of residencies, I think, in Bristol, didn't you?
Yeah, there's a restaurant, I'm not quite sure if it's there anymore, called Byzantium. There were a few restaurants that I did, but I ended up in that place because it was geared around sort of entertainments, and it was quite unusual. So it was an easy place to perform in. You weren't kind of feeling too, excruciating going up to people at the tables because they knew there was entertainment there. And then I would, I got the usual story, would get, kind of gigs off the back of that. But there weren't any other magicians around at the time. Certainly weren't any other mentalists. I remember clearly when I was veering in that direction, there were like 4 that I could, off the top of my head, Ian Rowland, Mark Paul, Graham Jolly. I wasn't really even a mentalist, and I'm sure there were some more. That's probably unfair to stop there, but at the time that was all I was sort of aware of. It certainly wasn't a big thing, and also I didn't find it that interesting either. It was a lot of billet work and so on. So it was a very small thing. I was veering in that direction, but there was no competition. There were no other real magicians that I kind of knew of particularly, not ones that were sort of working. So I just had this really amazing decade of being the guy in Bristol who did magic, and it was lovely. Amazing, lovely 10 years of nice, easy work. Wasn't earning a huge amount, but it was enough to tick by. I was basically paying like a student rent for the place I was in, and it was, lovely.
There's always a lot of downtime when you're a close-up magician. What did you used to do with the time?
I had my little parrot. I used to walk around Clifton Village in a cape and sort of go to coffee shops, read a lot, and I used to walk around Ashton Court. I don't know if you know Bristol at all. You do, don't you? You do know Bristol. So I live right by the suspension bridge, and on the other side is this big country estate. And I used to walk around dreaming up magic tricks, and then I'd go and try them out that week or whenever I had the residency or a gig in the restaurants, and it was like a lovely closed loop which is why a lot of magicians don't develop great social skills, because there's no need for it. I just used to do that, walk around reading, dreaming up tricks, going out and doing them in the evening, and then carry on like that. And that led to Pure Effect. That was the first book that came out. So I'd sort of, that was the outcome of just that kind of closed loop of existence.
You used to pop on the train to London as well, didn't you?
Probably.
Really interesting, because we've all heard the story, actually, that Jerry Sadowitz was the person who mentioned you to Michael Vine and Andrew O'Connor. But where did you first meet Jerry? Where did Jerry become aware of you? Do you know that?
So, I used to go to International Magic a bit and met Jerry there a few times. I don't think at the time I knew him as a performer or a TV entity particularly, because I was quite young then as well, and I guess he's always had that slightly kind of older, but certainly 18 plus demographic. But he was lovely, and he was seemed very fond of my work and me, and he became very supportive, and then through him I got a sort of low-key lecture through International Magic, which I gave in the sort of pub over the road that they used to use, and I gave a little sort of talk and demonstration of the kind of stuff that I was doing, which then led to a very small flurry of lectures. Possibly that only means one. I might have done 2, one of which you saw at International. Ian Rowland also, actually. I think Jerry and Ian both sort of nudged my name forward. So it was thanks to both of those, really, that my name got put forward. And then, yes, eventually he gave my name to Michael Vine, who's now my manager, who was co-running Objective, and him and Andrew O'Connor, Andrew and Michael, were looking for someone that could do mind reading, because it hadn't been done for so long. And eventually we all met and that was that.
We've had both Michael and Andrew O'Connor on the podcast. They were a pair of interviews that went out last year, and they both shared their experiences of meeting you. I'd love to know what your experience was of meeting them for the first time. They're a pair of characters, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Despised them. I still do. No, it was lovely. So I was in a queue for a theatre show in Bristol, and I got a phone call from Michael saying that they wanted someone to front a Channel 4 show. I didn't even know what that meant, but would I come to London and meet them? So I did, and I genuinely had no ambition to be on TV. I didn't quite know what it was they were talking about, but, you know, it was kind of my job, so of course I went to see them, and we met at Joe Allen's and had some food, and then I seem to remember, certainly Andrew said that I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't showing off or showing them tricks. I think they were sort of expecting. So at the end, I think I must have just asked, "Shall I show you something?" And I did the smoke trick that I did on Stephen Fry in the show, which is a bit terrible, really, lighting up a cigarette in a restaurant. And I did that. And if anybody knows the trick, there's a number of ways it can work out. And I would always try and nudge things in the best possible direction, which it did. That's how it worked out with Andrew. So he was flummoxed by it, and I sort of... And then later they came and saw me do a lecture. But I think I've always liked the fact that largely off the fact that trick happened to work out in a nice... one of the various computations, it just happened to work out the best, which is 1 in... whatever it is, 1 in 8 or 1 in 6 or something, the way I do it. It was... might have landed me the job.
I consider myself a broadcast journalist, and basically I've been doing my research. I've heard a rumour that when your books were republished, Andrew O'Connor told you to remove some of the routines from the book.
Well, it wasn't Andrew. It was David Berglas, I think, but he didn't tell me to remove them. I did this lecture for Mind Magic, I think it was called, Duncan Trillo's convention, which is where Andrew and Michael came and saw me and eventually signed me up. And I did finish my bit, and there were a couple of tricks. One called Reminiscence, which is quite an extended sort of mind-reading thing, and one called Lift, which is where someone's hand is remotely sort of brought up through the air. And when I stepped off the stage, David came over and said hello and said, "You know, you really shouldn't publish those." He's just said it he wasn't... Obviously, it wasn't his place to tell me not to, so he didn't mean it like that, but he just said, "You know, you really shouldn't publish those. You should keep those to yourself." And there had been an unofficial sort of self-produced first edition which had those in it, but I took that to heart. So when I put it out through a publishing company whose name I can't remember, Charlie Randall and I took them out. Oh, and I took one of them out. I took Lift out, but kept Reminiscence in because I felt they were the two strongest things in the book, and there was a fine line between keeping stuff back and not putting anything of real note in. So yeah, there was a first edition flying around with them both in.
So, like I said, they offer you the gig basically. Yeah. Did they promise you anything at that point other than just that first TV show, or?
No, we only ever presumed there'd be one show. I think they were a small production company, and they were pretty confident that if they could find a guy to do it, that show would get commissioned, which was, you know, a big deal for a small production company. So they spent a couple of years, I found out, looking for someone. Of course, again, there weren't many people doing mind reading, doing mentalism. There were plenty of magicians that could or would do some of that, but eventually they went with me, and I signed up. So I suddenly had a manager, and it was all about really that first show. And I think the repeat of the first show did very well. So then they commissioned another one. The channel commissioned another one. So we did that, and then they gained a bit of traction. There was a third one, then there was the Russian roulette show, and then that made more of a splash, and then it started to become a regular thing, and really, really built up from there.
I'd love to know, because you've just described your story up until then, the process of you making your first TV show. Did you enjoy the process, or did you find it a bit restrictive because of all the rules of television, or?
Not so much restrictive. What I found was, at that point, so I'd written Pure Effect, perhaps Absolute Magic as well. I had a reputation amongst the magic community, a nice one, a good one. I was known and liked, and, you know, I felt like a bit of a big fish in that world. And what you very quickly realise is that you're a very small fish once you step into a bigger pond, and just how much there is to learn. So I was working very closely with Andy Nyman, and I sort of very quickly thought, I don't really know anything here. Like, my style of performing was quite slow and quite self-indulgent, and I mean, I don't think I was getting away with that on stage in the little parlour shows I was doing. But even if I was, I certainly wouldn't on TV, where pace and it is very different. Andrew and Andy kind of have not exactly moulded me, but maybe that is okay to say. I mean, I kind of sort of knew what I wanted, but that, for a while I was feeling I was saying Andy's words, but I wasn't sidelined. I mean, we all discussed it. I think they both had some respect for me as a performer, and we all respected each other, and we all knew about magic, so we found it together. But I certainly felt at that time like I'm this is not me and everything I've taken from Close-Up Magic, going right, and now I'll do TV. I know nothing here, and I will, I'm just going to get shaped by this process, and that's fine. And I think that's how it had to be. And then likewise with the stage show, again, that was another big learning curve, just at a technical point of view. I remember being told, Andy would say, give it more energy. I didn't know what that meant. What is it? Does it mean shouting about? So you have to learn so much stuff like that. So all those learning curves really are what it's about, and they've always been the most exciting part of it. Just being happy to admit you know nothing.
There's a really interesting period of time in your life which has never been talked about before, but I'm fascinated by. And there was a period of time where basically you were on TV.
Yeah.
On Andrew O'Connor's episode, he mentioned that actually your TV shows didn't do really well until Russian Roulette. That was when it really picked up. So there was a period of time there, though, where Michael's put your prices up. Because,
new money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I understand you were skint for a little while, and but what I'm really interested in is, obviously, you had to have faith in them that they were going to deliver on what they said they were going to get you to the next level. Were there any doubts at any point?
No, they never made any promises. There was never any sense of a career was going to take off. It was simply that we'd done this show. I now had somebody who was going to, rather than me having to get my own gigs, I was going to have a manager. So somehow I imagined these gigs would come in, and I used to go out for £300. So this is I'm going to be talking like around sort of late 90s, I guess. I think I used to charge £300 or £500 to go out and do Close-Up, and Michael said, "Well, you're on TV now. It's different. We'll put you up for £3,000, which was just such an extraordinary amount at that time, and I couldn't believe it. So the show went out, and then a week later, first gig comes in, and it was for this oil or steel tycoon who later got into trouble with the Labour government, but it was an amazing, impressive rich man. So I go in and I do this gig, and I remember he tipped me. I think he tipped me like the $300 or $500 that would have been my actual fee before. So I thought my life's going to change now. But of course, this was the very first show going out. It wasn't Russian Roulette, so it was quite low key. No one really sort of knew who I was, and that was it. That was one gig, and that was the only gig that I got for a year. So I had to say to Michael, I don't really know what to do now, because should I just go back to the restaurants and then get my own gigs? But if I'm going to be giving you a percentage out of those gigs, I'm not really going to be earning very much. I didn't quite know what to do. And he said at one point, you should probably get another job, which is not what I expected to hear from my new manager. I remember one night I was at Byzantium doing my stuff around the tables there at this restaurant, and someone said, "Oh, you look like that guy Derren Brown off the TV." And I said very smugly, "Oh, I am. I am that guy." And they didn't believe me, because it was ridiculous that I was on TV, but also in a restaurant in Bristol. So yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because perhaps one's perception of someone that's on TV doing something like that is immediately they must be wealthy and all the rest of it. But it takes a while for reality to all catch up. And
so I'm going to ask a little bit of a nosy question. At what point in your life and your career did you feel that your life had really started to change? And I mean, in every respect, your profile, you being recognised on the street, financially. Was there one special or one moment where you really felt things had changed forever?
No, I don't think it happens like that. I mean, well, for some people it does. Michael's plan as a manager, which I think was very wise, was a kind of slow burn thing. So I never really splashed onto the scene. I started off the first couple of years, we're kind of a bit under the radar with the mind control specials, and then, by the time there was a big show like Russian Roulette, I'd sort of had a bedrock of sort of support and so on, and so it's a gradual thing. And I think the thing with being successful is that, and the reason why you should never aim for it it should never be your goal, is that it never really arrives. There's never a moment where you go, brilliant, so now I'm successful, or now I'm rich, or whatever those things are. They can only ever be byproducts, because they don't, apart from some cases, they don't announce themselves. They're just sort of, because you can always be more successful, you can always be more rich. You just, you're just in whatever you are at the moment. And if your aim is to have those things, you're only ever neurotically pushing forward to something that'll never quite arrive. So you can only really do what you do and love it for what it is, and let those other things come. So there was no moment. I mean, I've sort of had little moments of, wow, I can't quite believe I'm here doing this. Sometimes speaking to, when I first met Stephen Fry, I was a huge fan of and really, grown up with, adoring, and then he really liked my work, and Ricky Gervais was another one, and those moments you kind of go, oh God, that's so bizarre that someone I admire also admires me. So there are moments like that when you think, wow, this must have all fallen into place quite well, but it's such a kind of ethereal thing, and unless you happen to be suddenly thrust into it, which I don't think is very healthy, then I don't know, it just sort of slowly kind of creeps up, and you don't really feel any different. You don't feel, I mean, success and reputation, those are things that other people decide about you, aren't they? Your reputation, it comes or goes or lives or dies in the perceptions of other people. It's not actually a thing that you have. So the experience of being well known, whatever, isn't really any different than not being well known. You're still just you looking out. It's just how you manage other people's expectations, or manage the issues that come from it that are important.
That was an amazing answer, by the way. Sorry, I was a bit stunned there for a second. Just to go back, you mentioned Russian Roulette actually very briefly a moment ago. At the time, obviously, the publicity it generated, some would have considered negative, because there were speculations about what you'd done and all the rest of it. Did you ever view it like that, or were you just delighted immediately that it was getting a lot of attention?
It's odd that. So we were in Jersey, where there was no particular reporting on it, and so the show went out. That bit was live, and then the next day, we sort of packed up. We might have looked through for a few reviews, of which there weren't any, so we came back thinking, well, that was that. And then arrived in this country to find it was front page news. No, it was just different editions, different editions in Jersey than it is here of papers. It had come up in Prime Minister's Question Time or something, a parliamentary Question Time at least. So it was the first thing I'd experienced like that, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling of, and I still don't, the kind of, it's something we all have as a magician, isn't it? That kind of, if you're doing tricks, then at some level you can get caught out by those tricks, and no matter what you create around yourself, there's always that kind of, that potential for just someone going, oh, isn't it just a stupid trick? Given the huge amount of work that goes into those things, and your desire just to kind of entertain and provide a kind of amazing experience, the feeling of horror and sort of it's all the things when you're a underconfident kid that make you want to do magic. So people go, oh, you're amazing. That very thing is what you're plunged back into. It's like if you do a gig and you just do a card trick at a table and someone says, oh, you just had another one in your hand, and you're caught out. I mean, that's horrible. Let alone something that A, wasn't true, because the things that they were saying it was not really quite what happened, but there was a whole story with the police that had to say, because the police were getting into trouble for it. So they were saying about I'd use blanks because we had on our list of things we were bringing into the country, blank bullets, which we needed because we like camera rehearsals and so on. So you do need blank bullets. They didn't mention there were also, live bullets on that same list. So that's frustrating as well. That it was like, because it was a trick. I was doing a trick, so you've got that kind of guilty, horrible feeling, plus the story that's out isn't right. I can't set it straight because I don't want to give away how it was done, and B, it just makes it sound really stupid. So yeah, it was horrible. And there've been times since then when other shows that I've done that commonly people think maybe it's just an actor and the whole thing's sort of set up. And I've never quite just sort of let that stuff go. Oh, it's all publicity. I'm not quite that animal. I'm just too sort of sensitive about it. So
I've heard you've changed, and I've heard that years ago you would read everything about you, and now you don't want anything sent to you at all. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. Yeah, I try and avoid reading stuff on social media, reviews and things. I don't read. It can sound odd and precious when someone says that. I think it's quite common. It's quite a common thing. At the beginning it's different because of course you're excited that you're appearing in a newspaper and people have things to say about you, but often at the beginning things are all quite sort of positive. If you're doing something interesting and new, it's generally positive, but then once you become a feeling of like sort of public property, then of course people are more honest or they're more critical, and sometimes that's helpful, but a lot of the time it isn't, particularly social media, because if you read someone's diary or you eavesdrop outside a room and people are talking about you or they've written about you, it feels horrible, but equally you shouldn't be there reading that thing or listening in the first place, so you shouldn't be there. So although it's horrible to hear, you kind of you mitigate that feeling with, well, I shouldn't be listening to it anyway. And it's the same with social media. You shouldn't really be reading that stuff. If people are writing about you, they don't really think you're going to read it, but we don't have that feeling of like reading someone's diary, but it is a bit like reading someone's diary. And if we had the corresponding correct feeling of I shouldn't be reading it anyway, then I think it'd be a lot easier to kind of understand that it's why those things get written, and to take it on board without feeling terrible about it. But as it is, we just get angry and say, you should ignore the haters, or they're all, spotty 13-year-olds that you wouldn't want to meet anyway. But actually, the reality is, of course, it's fine that people write those things, but you shouldn't really be reading them. It's a bit like reading someone's diary. So, yeah, I kind of avoid... It's just purely for your own sanity, because it doesn't matter how many... you can read 100 lovely reviews. It's the one person that goes... I remember after Apocalypse... poor old Stephen, who was in it, there was a lot of stories going around that he was an actor because he looked like a guy that was in a noodle ad, so that became a thing that he was this actor that had been in a noodle advert. Anyway, so poor old Stephen has had this amazing experience and was looking forward to it going out, and now feels terrible. But I remember reading 100 lovely tweets about it, and then one guy just saying something like, "Oh, it's a shame he has to use actors." Just really disappointing, he's sold out, or something like that. And it was just that guy's disappointment. If it was, oh, that guy's an actor, I could dismiss it, because A, he isn't, and of course people can think that, that's fine, I understand that, but it was the guy's absolute given that he's an actor, and just his simple disappointment that I'd sold out and would have done that. And that really, that stings. That's a horrible thing to read. You want to scream, A, it isn't true.
Do you know what, Derren? I've got to just jump on something that you've done here, because it's just jogged my memory. I'm a big Copperfield fan.
Yeah.
And there's an interview with David Copperfield. Bear in mind, he got to the same level you did. You're both at the top of your games in different countries. And there's an interview he talks about how his biggest problem is when he's doing a show and he spots the one person in the front row who doesn't like it as much as everybody else, and it hurts. And this is the thing I think I find fascinating. Maybe you can provide an insight. Is why does it hurt you when you're at the level you are so much? I don't really sort of... Surely, when you've got all these things going on, why are you not just, oh, well, it's just one idiot? How come it does hurt you so much?
Well, because at the time, it's like why you should never, when, if someone does a show and you don't really enjoy it and they ask you afterwards, what did you think of it? I think Stephen Sondheim said this, you always have to say it was amazing and phenomenal and you were great. And if they say, no, but what did you really think of it? Then you say, no, it was really amazing and phenomenal and you were great. Maybe 6 months later you can tell them the truth, but at the time, they've gone out and just bled for you for 2 hours. So that's what you're kind of, a performer is making himself very vulnerable. He's kind of going, oh God, please love me, please love me, please love me, for that period of time, whether it's on TV or stage. And you naturally, you're then going to be very sensitive to what comes back. So you either, go mad and just chase the feeling of being loved, or you try and have enough faith in what you're doing, have a modicum of madness, because that comes with the job and the very fact you're doing it, and then just try and keep it at arm's length. Because if like my PR guy said to me, we've done the stats, 85% of people love the show, I'd go, great, that's good, that sounds healthy, which is great. But I don't want to read the 15% of people saying why they thought it was terrible. So you just have to kind of, I find just separating myself from that is the only way. And you're right, the one person in the audience who sat there yawning with their arms folded, of course, is going to... Schopenhauer talks about why happiness is a negative thing. It's defined by an absence. So like if your body is fine, you're in perfect health, but your toe hurts, you're not aware of how great everything else is. You just focus on your bad toe. And then actually what happiness is an absence of all the stressors and all the disturbances, and kind of what's left, kind of a feeling of tranquility. So likewise, you look out of an audience, here's 2,000 people enjoying it, because that's what they do every night, so that's normal, that's kind of what you're used to. But if something goes wrong, if they don't laugh at a joke, or if you see one person who's sat there kind of, grim-faced, hating it, then which when there's 2,000 people and your house lights are coming up a lot, most nights there's going to be somebody like that. And naturally that's going to draw your attention like a bad toe, and you can't do much about it, because you are, you're there going, love me, and there's one person who clearly doesn't. It's horrible.
I've spent the last few days doing a lot of research for today, and I've watched a lot of your TV shows again.
I'm so sorry.
And no, they're amazing. I'm really interested to know, one question that just occurred to me on the tube on the way in actually was, do you have a favourite of all the TV shows you made?
The experience of making a TV show is, very layered. You can do a show that's great, but the experience of making it was a nightmare, so that's obviously going to tarnish your view of it, or a show that may not be particularly popular or even successful, but successful in terms of a piece of work, not as in popularity, that you just sort of love. So my favourites are the two shows that I've done, Apocalypse and Here at 30,000 Feet, where it's actually made a real difference to the guy going through it. Both shows had a proper impact on the guys doing it, which is always going to matter more, irrespective of how good or bad the shows were. But that has to matter more than, just how great I looked in a show, or how many people watched it, what the viewing figures were, or so that in terms of what's going to count at the end of the day. At least that's something in a job that's kind of pretty fatuous a lot of the time in terms of being on telly and entertaining and so on. It's some of that's lovely, and occasionally it might even be important and worthwhile. And certainly there's moments that are, if you feel you've genuinely helped someone else. So those are my favourites. I think they're not necessarily... I think particularly Apocalypse, because it was such an enormous, ambitious thing to do. So the sheer... And to have the... I remember coming up with the idea of it, and the fact that it remained, that it didn't get compromised 100 times and end up watered down. But the fact that it was just... We all went with it and made it work, and the team worked so hard. I remember there was like the bit where we had to make his TV go off in the show. So he's watching telly, and because there's some meteor disturbances that are happening, his TV goes off. So to make that happen, we've got cables that we've run out through the garden into his shed, and in the shed are two guys that have worked for like 3 months without a day off, and their job for this nothing moment in the show is just to pull a junction thing apart and make the TV go off. They can't then leave, because if they crawl across his garden, he might see them either from the front room or from his bedroom. So they have to sleep the night in his shed and then sneak out, early in the morning. And that's like... In fact, no, they couldn't even sneak out in the morning because he might look out the window. They had to wait till he was off at work the next day or wherever he was going. So, and that was a nothing moment in the show. So the sheer amount of work going into something like that is so enormous. Perhaps it's one of the reasons why people don't believe we've really done it, because the logistics are so huge. So yeah, those are the ones that I think will really stand out for me, but I generally like them. The only one I wasn't really keen on was the lottery prediction show that I did.
Why didn't you like it?
There was when we'd written the show, it was just going to be one of a series of episodes, and it sort of really could have been any trick. This one was going to be a lottery prediction, which has been done before. by magicians. So we weren't writing it thinking it was going to be a huge deal, but it became a huge deal because the channel really marketed it as a big publicity stunt. So of course that's great. It's a little bit daunting. I sort of naturally want everything to be kept quite quiet, but nonetheless that happened. And then so the Wednesday night, the prediction went out, and it made for quite a big splash. And at the end of that show, on the live bit on the Wednesday night, the actual prediction I said on Friday's show, I'll tell you how I did it. And then the Thursday night we recorded the show that then went out on the Friday. But because it was only ever written as a sort of a fun episode within a load of other episodes, and for fans that were watching this show anyway, we weren't really going to explain how I'd done it. There was going to be a kind of a cod explanation and a kind of a twist ending, which would have been fine if you were just watching it as a fan. But of course, by this point, millions of people are watching it, genuinely thinking they're going to be told how it's done. And what the idea of the show was, there'd be this cod explanation about the wisdom of crowds, that if you got people together and they approached it in the right way, and you showed them all the previous numbers that had come up, that between them they could come up with the new numbers in this kind of, which obviously is nonsense, but it was a really good trick to actually make that work with the people. And then at the end of the show, I'd go, well, you can believe that if you like, or maybe I just fixed it. And if I did fix it, that means I could have predicted those numbers. Like a year ago, I could have told you what they were. And then we cut to, and the people that were there in the room when we recorded it saw this on the night, the real ending of the show, which was, it's last December. I'm on the top of a bus going through Regent's Street. It's clearly Christmas. All the Christmas lights are up. And there'll be a bunch of kids and their parents who will attest to this as well. We've got a load of kids on the top of the bus, and I'm going around with a big bag of numbers, and I ask each kid to reach in, pull out a number and show it to the camera. And they all do it, and those numbers are then the numbers that come up in the lottery thing, whatever it was, 3 months later, that night when the show goes out. So it was this great ending, but what had happened in between the prediction show on the Wednesday was there was so much weight on this that for me then to say or imply that I'd fixed the lottery, because the idea was we decided on these numbers last year, now I'm going to fix the lottery to make them come up. While it's fine in a kind of a sort of a magic show, that suddenly could get properly investigated, and the whole thing could just be, I could make the whole thing so much worse. So I remember we recorded the thing on the Thursday night with that ending, and the people in the room when I was doing it live saw that ending. Obviously as a film that we played in, and then the next morning we're about to send that off to Channel 4, and I'm saying we can't include that ending in the show, but if we take it out, all we've got is this cod explanation about the wisdom of crowds, which is sort of a bit insulting if I'm kind of if that's supposedly if I'm saying how I did it. So do I leave it there and I make the show potentially a little bit sort of insulting, or do we put this thing on the end and then risk kind of getting into a lot of trouble, let alone having to go through it all again, exactly how did you do it, and then having to sort of explain it all in detail. So we sort of found a halfway house where we didn't include the ending that could get us into trouble, but just had a kind of well, you can believe that if you like, or maybe I just fixed it, and then there was kind of a little question mark in the end as to how it was done. But of course people don't really remember that, they just remember that I was at least it's how I see it, that they remember that I was just selling the cod explanation as the real one. So that's never sat right with me, because it wasn't what the show was supposed to be, and it just became a victim of its own success that it had to be this other version that went out. But apart from that one show, I've always been happy with them.
Can I tell you about my favourite one?
Yeah, go on, please.
The one I love, it's from many years ago, was The System.
Oh, thank you.
Really like that. I'd love to know the writing process of that. How on earth that came around? It's such a clever concept. Do you remember? It was a long time ago.
I think I'd heard of it as a scam, like a sort of a mail order thing that
pyramid selling.
Yeah. That if you approach enough people to start with, of course you'll have somebody will go through this. So the idea, if people haven't seen it, is that imagine you get in your email a prediction of the winner of a horse race the next week, and maybe you disregard the email as spam, or maybe you sort of remember it, and then that horse wins, and you go, oh, that's weird, I got a prediction a week, and then you get another email and saying, hope you saw the last horse won, here's the winner of next week's. So maybe this time now you look out for it, and sure enough it wins again. Then you get another email saying, you want to start putting some money on this, here's the winner next week. It's anonymous, weird emails you're getting, so maybe you put a bit of money on it and it wins again. And then, so you can do this again and again, and then the last email is, do you want to know how this is done? For £1,000 you can buy the system, you can buy the secret. So you do, by this point you do. So you pay £1,000, and the secret is simply that 1 million people got that first email, and only a sixth of them that happened to win. You know, as in that 1 million people were divided into groups, and each group got a different winning horse. And the group that happened to win with their winning horse gets sent the second email that does this. And eventually, you know, you're narrowing it down, but there'll be at least one person who'll get maybe 5, 6 emails in a row, each one saying the winning horse. And of course, they'll pay the £1,000 because they don't quite. You know, it's a hard thing to get your head around. So yeah, I think it had been around as an idea, and I just thought it was so beautiful.
Well, there are some other shows you've made which have been about debunking things as well. Yeah. And the one I watched yesterday was Miracles for Sale. So this was where you took.
Oh yeah, yes.
This is where you took Nathan to America and trained him to be a spiritualist healer, basically. I'm really interested to know your answer to this. I want to play devil's advocate with you, if that's okay. Yeah. So there are moments in that show where I can sense your anger at the spiritualist world. I mean, the beginning.
I should say it's sort of evangelical world, isn't it? It's not really spiritualist in the sense of mediums. It's the kind of Christian evangelical, Bible Belt world of healing and slaying people in the spirit and so on. Yeah.
At the beginning of the show, you call it a highly dangerous scam. So I think we know exactly where you stand right from the beginning.
Yeah.
In the show, you teach Nathan how to be a faith healer, to prove that faith healers are frauds and they're just doing tricks that can be taught to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
If these people did ever admit that their skills were fake, which of course they won't, but if they did, I think their next argument would be that they're doing some good by providing desperate people with some sort of hope. What would you say to that in response?
Well, that's always an interesting argument. You say the same about mediums, for example, that, you know, they're if you can't quite let go of someone who's died, then of course the promise of contact with them is going to be very appealing. As to whether or not that's beneficial, that's a different thing. But there are reasons for that. You know, we live in a culture where our myths, our narratives about death have been disbanded, along with most superstitions since the Enlightenment. So we're kind of left with a slightly scared, lonely approach to death. So naturally, mediums are going to have a promise that's going to be very appealing to us. So that will always happen. And similarly with the faith healers, that promise will always be appealing. I think we like to transcend, and it's a very important thing in life to have meaning. Even if there isn't really any meaning, but we have to find it for ourselves, and we have to connect with something larger than ourselves in some way, whether that's having a kid, or religion, or a hobby or a passion that you devote yourself to. Those things are important. So the promise of something magical, of something bigger than ordinary life, whether that can heal you or connect you with the dead, is always going to be very, very appealing. It doesn't necessarily make it beneficial. I suppose that depends on the individual and depends on, you know, there's a difference between going and seeing a medium and then coming away going, well, okay, it probably wasn't true, but it kind of made me feel quite happy, and that's fine, versus someone that, you know, spends all their money following these people around the country, hoping for something that they're never going to get and never quite letting go. So what you do see that with the faith healing world, you see people that are desperately in need of medical attention that won't take it because the model of faith healing is you have to have, you know, complete faith in this. And if you even consider normal medicine, then that's why it didn't work, because you know, you let the devil in. You didn't have enough faith, so it's your own fault. Certainly not the healer's fault that it didn't work. It's your own fault. So I think that you know, the things you have to notice are no one actually really gets better. That's the big thing. So it is sort of a lie. It's not doing what it's promising. And whereas you might go away from a medium maybe taking some comfort from that, or a psychic, I can kind of understand that more. Whereas if you've got something really wrong with you, you go up on stage and have a healer pretend to heal you. You think you've been touched by God, you think you've been healed, and you haven't. You've bounced around on stage, potentially made it a lot worse, and then you've gone away committed to not taking any medication, because that would undo the healing, because that's not having enough faith. I mean, you've got, for someone to decide that, well, okay, maybe it's a lie, but my lies are what people need to hear to feel better about themselves. A, that's a very questionable place to arrive at for yourself. But B, it's not just a question of a sort of a belief about the afterlife or cosmology. That is actually someone's, you know, real health that you are potentially damaging. And the stories that I've heard about, this pastor who's let his daughter die. I mean, it's bad enough imagine having a child die, but and then imagine you've let that happen because you couldn't give her the medication because you yourself were part of that world. He himself did this sort of evangelical healing. He absolutely believed in it. So when his daughter got ill, he just had to watch her die because he couldn't break that pattern of belief and actually give her the medicine she needed. So it is dangerous. It's dangerous in a way that those other things often aren't. I think you'd be hard pushed to really see how does that help anybody. And bear in mind, I then did this every night in the last stage show that I did, Miracle, and it was really interesting doing it. Really fascinating seeing how even a skeptical audience, these are not religious people, how well they responded to it. Somebody had been paralysed down one side all their life, and for the first time they were able to feel and move. So it's not just like a bad back that's feeling better. I mean, some extraordinary things. I'm doing it and I'm explaining it and I'm debunking it and I'm purposely not promising it's any more than it is. But even then I thought, you can see how people go mad with it themselves, think, well, I must be special because this is happening every night. How that becomes quite an appealing, tempting thing to sort of run with yourself as a performer. Why wouldn't you start to go mad and start to believe it? But even for me, I was thinking, well, I could do like a show at the O2 or something. If I tell people that this isn't real, but it has this real effect, even if it's only for just the here and now, but certainly can be massively eye-opening for some. I mean, some people were coming up and really moved by the fact that they weren't feeling pain or whatever. Then that's okay. I should do that. I should be able to do that. No, that's not going mad. But of course, it is going mad, and you're going to start attracting people that are desperate for something you can't ultimately give them. So these are all interesting grey areas, but I think particularly with faith healing, it's not a good thing because you're getting involved at a level you really shouldn't be.
In the second half of this interview, we're going to talk about your live shows, which are my favourite things ever.
Thank you very much.
One of the things that has happened with all of the live shows is they have been recorded for television.
Yeah.
Are you pleased with the way they turn out for television? Obviously, they always have to be edited down to fit into a TV form.
Well, sadly, you only get about half of the show in the TV version. The weird thing for me is that I start to remember them as the TV versions. So, like at the moment, we're thinking about a show for Broadway, and I'm going to take things from previous shows. And because I've seen the stage shows, a couple of times, maybe I've shown people on TV or I've seen clips on YouTube occasionally, I've sort of forgotten the reality of half of those shows that I just never made it to the, tricks that I just totally forgot I ever did. And so that's a bit of a shame, but you can't, there's not enough TV time, and also just pace-wise, I remember the Oracle act, which I did in Evening of Wonders, which was a Q&A act, was, I think, really strong on stage, but when I watched it just as a kind of unedited sort of like the vision mix they call it, it's just literally the camera's on you and you're seeing the whole thing in real time on a TV screen. You absolutely want to kill yourself. It's so slow and just so you have to crunch those things down, partly for just pace and partly because there's not enough time on TV. But yeah, it is a shame. It's a shame to lose so much, but that's the nature of theatre, darling, isn't it? It's that kind of ethereal thing. It's it's gone.
Well, we're going to have to talk about all the shows after the commercial break, because believe it or not, I have some commercials.
No way. I'm going to have a wee.
Yeah. Do you use Gigio?
Do I use Gigio?
Yeah.
Yes, I've got one in at the moment.
Brilliant.
The Magicians Podcast brought to you in association with the Magic Circle, the world's premier magical society. Are you ready to join the world's most exclusive magic club? Visit themagiccircle.co.uk to find out more.
It's the last time, so come on, join in!
Gigio, free for 30 days. Be a pro, get Gigio.
Ah, I'm going to miss that. I'm sure you're going to miss it too. Everyone's going to miss that. Sad, isn't it? Gigio, my friends, is a web-based software designed for professional and semi-professional entertainers anywhere in the world. It will save you hours in the office every single week. It generates PDF contracts and invoices for you. It will track your payments. It will update the diary on your phone automatically. You can schedule emails to your clients to make sure you get the gig again next year. It's integrated with PayPal, and most importantly, All the top professionals in this country use it. If you've never taken a look at it, go to the website right now. The website is getgigio.com, where a free 30-day trial awaits you. Yes, a free 30-day trial awaits you right now at the website getgigio.com. Gigio is spelled Giggio. It is time now to hear a message from my favourite magic shop, Alakazam, and a reminder again that until the end of this month, the end of September, you can receive 10% off your order when you get to the checkout on the Alakazam website. Enter the code MPC10. The code is MPC10. If you've never used Alakazam Magic before, here is all the information you will need.
Whether you're new to magic or a seasoned professional, Alakazam Magic are here to help. Alakazam have been supplying magic to magicians for well over 20 years. Not only do we carry all the latest and greatest magic tricks, books and DVDs, but we also manufacture one of the finest ranges of magic tricks in the world. The Alakazam name is synonymous with great customer service, educated advice and honesty. So if you're shopping for new magic, make sure you check out our website www.alakazam.co.uk or pay a visit to our fully stocked shop.
It's the last time we'll hear the commercial breaks. By the way, Darren, I forgot to mention, this is going to be...
My wee-wee was fine, thanks for asking, by the way.
Yeah, I don't want to ask, really.
There's no blood, or it was fine.
Today, potentially, is going to be the best day ever. Do you know why? Because after this, I'm going to see Les Mis.
Are you really?
And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I consider myself a broadcast journalist.
Yes,
and
you mentioned that.
In my research, apparently you love Les Mis and you've seen it loads of times. Is that true?
I have. Although the last time I saw it, I kind of realised it had reached that point that the audience was so in love with it that I went with my partner at the time, who then had that feeling of like he was the only one that didn't get it in the audience. So the last time was slightly marred by the sheer love that everybody else in the audience had for it, but I do love it. It's a great
How many times have you seen it?
show. I think I've probably seen it maybe 9 times.
Wow.
But not so much in the last few years, more kind of like as a student, and then after that I am surprisingly old now.
I'm a bit obsessed by Phantom. I've seen it 6 times in the last 6 months.
No, see, I'm less of a fan.
You're not a fan of that?
Not really, no.
That's interesting.
Not as much.
We're going to talk about your live shows now, which is
Okay.
very exciting. Interestingly, one of the people I'm going to Les Mis with tonight is another magician called Dave Wilmot. And here's something you might want to know.
Okay.
About 15 years ago, Dave Wilmot used to get you to sign flyers at the stage door, and he'd sell them on eBay for 15 quid.
That's Dave Wilmot.
Yes, from Bristol, yeah.
Well, that's not out. That's that's a weird one, isn't it? I get sent them like at theatres. Will you sign them? And you can always tell because they never give a name. It's just simply, we're huge fans. Would you please sign it and send it back? So unless I think there's now a thing amongst celebs that you don't sign something unless there's a name on it, and it's a real shame. It's sort of become a bit of a weird thing, but not that it matters to me really if anyone's selling them on eBay, but it's a bit disheartening when you've sort of signed something thinking it's for someone's kid and then it's not.
Do you know one of the greatest things I've ever seen you sign? I was very lucky. I was backstage at the Reading Hexagon Theatre.
Ah, yes.
And there's a poster of yours on the wall, and you'd written to the backstage crew, "Thanks for a great week. And if you ever tell them how it was done, I will effing kill you all."
Right.
Brilliant, Darren. Absolutely brilliant. We laughed a lot when we saw that.
We laughed. We still do. We're still chuckling now. That's the gift of comedy.
I mean, you've done 7 shows.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and talk a little bit about all of them. But there's something which I want to talk about. Opening night. It's
Okay.
normally in Dartford or sometimes Crawley, I think.
Yes.
And Andrew O'Connor talked about this on his episode, how you walk on stage with 2 to 3 hours of new untested material,
Yeah.
and usually knock it out the ballpark on opening night. What is that night like for you? I mean, no other magician does that. Walks on stage with 2 or 3 hours of new material. What's that?
And then also, I mean, the other part of that is there'll be a lot of stuff wrong with it the first night, so we make a load of changes and go out the second night and the third night, the fourth night again with almost a different show every night because so much changes. So that first week is quite intense. It's the most difficult part of doing it. You know, writing the show is lovely, rehearsing the show is lovely, doing the tour is such a delight. The first week is okay, it's fine, but it is so much to kind of take on board and remember. And I've never got like stress or nervy about performance, but I get a sort of that kind of thing. I become very, very focused, utterly joyless, just trying to focus and remember. This was before the show. When I go out, I always feel it's fine because, they're people that are happy to be there, and if I make some mistakes, it's fine. I mean, making mistakes is, I think, quite good. It's like a juggler dropping a ball. It's important. I did a show once where I couldn't get the cap off the pen, and the review, it happened to be a press night, and the review was lovely, but it said the best point of the show was where he does this thing that he can't take the lid off the pen, like it was, I'd done it on purpose, and really shows us that as a human being, and actually what a difference that made to the whole thing for them. So mistakes are fine. So I'm very happy with that. But it is the nature of the show, like particularly with this last one, Miracle, that I just don't know, because you can't rehearse with 500 people in a rehearsal room. That's a show. So if you're doing stuff, a lot of what I do, particularly in the second halves of the show, do rely on large numbers of people, and just hoping that enough people will pick them up, will pick up the suggestion, or pick up the thing that I want them to pick up on, so I can make the second half work. On top of that, particularly with this last show, so I'm not just repeating myself every year, if I'm going to do some kind of suggestion-based thing out over the audience, I need to, to make that as amazing as possible and not feel repetitive, I have to do the minimum to make the maximum come out of it. So if I can spend maybe just 3 minutes doing a quick thing with the audience, but get like faith healing out of that, and then that's a good ratio, and that's worked very well, as opposed to taking 10 minutes to do something that doesn't end up creating such an effect. So not only is this is the first time I'm trying it, but also I don't even know whether the technique that I'm using will work, because I'm trying every year to do less and less and less to get more and more and more. So you're being braver as a hypnotist, maybe the wrong word, but whatever that thing is, to see if it'll work. But of course it's your own confidence that ultimately makes it work. So there's no answer other than just to go out and do it utterly confidently. But I think what helps is I'll have certain things in place that even if I went out on that first night and no one responded to the faith healing particularly, I knew I'd get some people up that would at least say they felt a bit better with this and that, and then I got certain mechanical effects and things in place that I know I'll be able to get to the end of the show. So you have that. Anything else is then a great bonus, and then you work out how to build on those bonuses and make them then part of the fabric of the show. And by the end of the first week, you're sort of just about there. It is tough.
In Miracle this year, last year, we've been doing it for 2 years, I think, you made the decision to put a levitation in. Which is an extraordinary and unexpected moment for a magician who's followed your career since the first show. Was that a challenging conversation to have with your team? Is this the right thing to put in this show, or?
Oh no, I think we all so Andy and Andrew and I, we always love those weird. It's like was it Enigma that finished with a song with the McFly thing? I mean, it's just like, let's finish with a song. What I tend to do with some of those things that I think make them feel, at least to me, feel more like me, is make the thing, whether it's a levitation or whatever, about the shows. Again, I hope this doesn't sound precious, but it's in the back of my mind what I always go back to when I do the shows. They're not about me. They shouldn't be about me. They're about the members of the audience. Because that's the nature of what we do, isn't it? If you see a play and you don't quite get it, it doesn't mean the play's failed. If you see a magic show and you don't get it or understand it, then the magic's failed. I mean, it only exists in your head as a spectator. So I really try and make the shows absolutely about that. So, I've thought, for example, I've never done a 2-person code act because there's only one of me. But if I did do one, the person on stage would be a member of the audience who's divining it and giving the information, not my psychic assistant. When I did the spirit cabinet, the medium in the cabinet tied up is a member of the audience, not my assistant. So likewise, when we thought about, let's do a levitation, it's great, but it's got to be a member of the audience. Let's levitate a member of the audience. Because what you've got to do to somebody to make that happen, but you don't want them freaking out or breaking the sort of show by, so it's also relying on them being in the right state. And I've had people levitate like asleep, like as in sort of tranced out. Some of them go into this sort of blissful, like their arms go out and they're looking up to the heavens and this sort of beatific sort of grin on I mean, it's extraordinary how people reacted to it. So part of, to make that work and get away with it on a member of the audience is, because it's not like an instant stooging thing where you can give them a bit of a nudge and say, go on, just go with it. It had to be very sort of real for them at the time. So that's the fun. That's so much fun. The challenges that decision throws up to make it about someone else makes it so much fun. I don't know to what extent that translates to the rest of the audience. I'm sure it does. I'm sure even if you're not a magician, to sit there in the audience and watch someone go up in the air that you know has just come out in the audience surely has to be much more interesting than just the magician doing it when they could be rigged up to anything, you know. So that was a really fun thing. There were a couple of nights where it was a little bit hairy, but generally speaking, it was. I loved doing it every night, and I loved the madness of it, and the reaction it got was never a sort of, you know, huge round of applause and a cheer. It wasn't that sort of thing. It was just this thing of what the fuck was that? And it's so lovely. At least I hope that's what it was. But by all reports, that's what it was. Yeah, it was really, really good fun to do.
Amongst my magician friends, one of the things that comes up from time to time is we always say one of the most interesting rooms in magic that we would all love to see is your rehearsal room with Andy and Andrew. On Andrew's episode, he mentioned how at the very, very beginning, you turn up an hour late and you'd forgotten your thumb writer. That's a quote.
Yes.
And now
absolutely,
he said you've got higher standards than they have in terms of what you you want a thing to be. They'll think it's finished and you'll go, we haven't even started yet.
I remember those conversations, yeah.
Really kind of what I'm asking is, what is that? Can you give us a little bit of an insight into that room when you through there in terms of the process you go through?
Okay, well, so Miracle was a good example because the three of us all worked really together. What's happened historically is that Andy's directed, Andrew has then come in as sort of a fresh pair of eyes intermittently throughout, and sort of directed as well, kind of co-directed, but hasn't sort of been there every day, but has had a huge input by coming in as a pair of fresh eyes, which is very important creatively to have that. What we did with Miracle, because Andrew was going to be around more, and Andy was busy on a filming project or theatre project, I can't remember. Either way, we didn't have him as much as normal, so they shared it much more, 50-50. And I would say, so obviously I'm there all the time. I'd say Andy's strength is quite an emotional, playful approach, and when I'm working with Andy, we might get not stuck on, but spend a lot of time on just like a little moment that we both just love, and then that will really appeal to us, and then suddenly, you know, half the day's gone, and we've been talking about and playing with one little thing. We both get very excited about that kind of thing. Andrew's different, and you've met them both. Andrew's more. It's a reason why the production company was called Objective. He's got a very kind of down the line, kind of no nonsense thing, which
You find that easy to work with though when you know where you stand with someone in a way.
Yeah, some people do find that quite intimidating with them actually. But yeah, but it's so the two of them work for like Andrew's thing, which he said this year, which I thought was brilliant. It's like, well, when you build a cake, when you make a cake, you build the cake first, then you put the icing on. And it's very aware in a rehearsal process that often people are trying to put the icing on before they build the cake. So, whereas with Andy, it's perhaps sometimes a bit more meandering of a process. Not all the time, it's a bit unfair, but if I was making a contrast, with Andrew, it's very kind of, right, we're going to do this, and we're not going to worry about any of that, we'll come to that later, we're just going to plough on and plough forward, and then we'll get back to those moments later on. So that they have different ways of working. We've all worked together for years. I'm quite... I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they'd have to describe what I'm like. It's hard to say. But somehow between us all, that works really, really well. And Andrew and I might work for a day together. Then Andy comes in and goes, "Oh, I don't know. I don't really like that," or around the other way. I'm often in the middle, getting a bit batted around between the two of them. What is important, what's huge, is the importance of directors, which magicians generally don't have. A, because they cost money, and B, because there's just a particular sort of ego issue around magic that I think you don't get. If you're an actor, you need a director. I remember Judi Dench being interviewed once, and I think it was a South Bank show, and Melvin Bragg said, what's your favourite, what's the best performance you think you've ever given? And she said, I've absolutely no idea, you'd have to ask the director. And at the time I thought, what a weird answer, but totally get it now. And the number of shows when Andy or Andrew have been there and I've come off thinking, oh, that was great, and maybe even backstage they'll be like, oh, that was a really good one, and they just haven't particularly, certainly haven't thought so. Or other nights I've come off just, wanting to claw my face off because I thought it went terribly, and they thought it was phenomenal. So it's hard to gauge those things. Like a big thing that really translates as a performer is being absolutely in the moment with the show, which is very difficult to kind of do that very consciously. I mean, you can remind yourself consciously to do it, But it's easier to be making choices like, okay, I've got to keep the pace up here, or I've got to make this bit funny, but all those things take you out of it. But you might feel that's gone really well because that was really pacey, and not 3 minutes off the second half, and all those things that you think work well as a performer. Whereas actually, for someone that sat there, let alone your director, those things you just might felt you were rushing, or that or what you thought was funny was just a bit slick. That's one thing I have to work against, is it not feeling like a slick cabaret act. So the thing I always try and go back to is keeping it very much real and in the moment and in the here and now. And but those are difficult things to judge yourself whether you've got it right.
I spent my 20th birthday at the Palace Theatre watching you do your first show.
Oh, wow.
I think it was my 20th, it might have been my 19th, I'm not sure. But Derren Brown Live, and this one was never televised.
Yeah.
Is it true that the first half of that show has sort of become your corporate set now when you do it?
Yes, sort of. It's not quite. It was at the time, because I had that act, so that became the first act of the show. So it was around the other way. I was already doing it, so the stage show built on that, and then over the years my corporate act, which I don't do that. I love doing corporate work. I just don't often really get the chance. So now it's still a couple of bits from that, but now I mainly build it around a Q&A act, which is the Oracle act from a later show. So that's now become the bulk of my corporate act. But yeah, that was a I loved that show, and the second half was a séance, and we had a Ouija board, and every night I would make out that I'd say normally we'd contact the spirit of somebody, we choose someone in the audience, but actually tonight I've got friends in who friends of my best friend from school who died when we were both 11, but they're here tonight, so tonight we're actually going to do this differently and just we're going to try and get in contact with him. And so every night I'd say that, and every night I'd just look at a random couple in the audience and refer back to them. And there was a point when the show would go a bit weird, and I'd have to ask them if it's all right if we carry on. And every night this sort of random couple would be looking back at me, not sort of quite understanding what they'd got roped into. And that was a really fun thing. And I remember there was a effect in it which I think was so strong. If it's all right to say that about my own tricks, but so again, somebody comes out the audience and they become the medium, and they're sat there, and I give them a whole load of whatever the guy's name was, because each night they'd first of all they discern the name, which was shown to be correct, and then I'd get them to close their eyes, and not even close their eyes. Imagine he's walking up the aisle towards them, and to describe what they see, and behind them on the screen would come up a picture of this friend of mine. And they would just describe him
That's amazing.
perfectly, and then he'd come up and he'd touch them on the hand, and they'd feel that, and it was a really lovely thing. And again, that idea of making the person out the audience, making the spectator the person with the skill base, or the person doing the thing, I find really interesting.
So from there we went to Something Wicked This Way Comes. I watched this yesterday. But do you know one of the things that crossed my mind? You do the thing with the broken glass.
Yes.
Was that like the first time you do that? The first time when you're like putting faith in what you've been told is going to happen. Do you remember the first time you did it in a rehearsal space?
First time I did it completely was at Jonathan Goodwin's house. So this was actually, in terms of what you were saying earlier on about what it's like working with Andy and Andrew in those early days, I never really liked doing the broken glass, but it was something that Andy felt very strongly about. And I think if anything's changed nowadays, if I didn't want to do something, I'd say so, and I wouldn't do it, because actually, not because I'm a diva, because if you can do a show every night, you've got to really love them. You've got to be in love with the material that you're doing. And I never did that. I never really enjoyed it because it's sort of messy and uncomfortable. But I was at Jonathan Goodwin's house. I'd met Jonathan as a close-up magician in Bristol when Objective was just in its early days, and they were casting for a show called Monkey Magic. And I said, I met this great magician, Jonathan Goodwin. You should see him. And then so he came to London, and then he was brilliant, of course, and they cast him in that. And then we lived together for 6 months while I did the Russian roulette. So we became good friends. And he showed me how to do the broken glass, and he just smashed bottles up in his... showed me the bottles, smashed them in his room, in his kitchen. He walked across them, and I'm going, right, I presume then they're fake bottles, which of course every night is what people think. Well, I was doing it. It doesn't matter how much you prove they're not. And he was like, no, it's okay. Just do it. Just do it, but just do it carefully. And then I did, and I couldn't quite believe that I'd done it. So yes, that's what I mainly remember from that show. But they had the newspaper prediction at the end as well, which I think was felt like a good ending, felt like a good sort of trick. And that was the first time I think we very consciously used a David Berglass routine as the the main part of the main finale, and sort of built on it and changed it a bit, but essentially went to him and spoke to him about using that, and then that became a recurring thing. And then hilariously in this last show, Miracle, because we just had the idea for the ending totally differently, which was that a story that had been generated by the audience would end up being predicted in a newspaper, not as a headline, but actually as a story, as a thing that had happened locally in the local newspaper. And then there was an ad in the back for a little kicker. I don't want to spoil the end of the show because it's going out soon, but hilariously we thought, well, this isn't really a thing to speak to Berglass about this year. We've gone, we've been doing our own thing. And of course it turned out, of course, he had done it himself. Not quite the thing with the story, but certainly the kicker, and of course it would have been great to speak to about it. So he really is truly a master, isn't it? He has done everything and done it first.
In the newspaper prediction you mentioned at the end there, of course, it's got the fantastic video as well, that Coops has been recording from the wing all the way through. That's kind of sort of what you're known for. If you speak to the public now, that's what they think you do.
Kind of reveal of how it was done all along.
You put it in someone's head and or you mention something. Where did the idea come from to do that video at the end? Do you remember?
I think...
Was it there right from the beginning of the tour?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It was always... I presume so. It's very possible we did the first couple of nights and then thought it needed something else. I've always liked that idea, which actually probably comes from Penn and Teller, where they would, they were sort of known as the sort of bad boys of magic for revealing stuff, and magicians got very upset, but very quickly realised, they're not doing that in a sort of witless way. They're doing it when the reveal is more interesting than the trick. So that had always been the rule, that it's that if you're going to say, and this is how it's done, with obviously a certain amount of theatrical license anyway, but you do that when you're topping the trick that you've just done. So that newspaper prediction is, I think, topped then by the reveal that all the way through the show I've been dropping these hints in, and then we videoed them, and now we're going to play them back to you. And it was that's I suppose that is something I've got known for, kind of thing.
So, Evening of Wonders was the next one. I'm so sorry, I feel like we're just skipping through things.
No, please do.
There's just so much to talk about, so we just do have to go through things a bit quickly. First of all, it's the best line you've ever done, I think, on this, isn't it? Out loud, please, I'm not a fucking mind reader.
Not a fucking mind reader.
Is that your favourite line you've ever... It's got to be, isn't it?
Out loud, please. Yeah, I think I've probably used that in a few shows.
That's the first time I heard it. If I remember right, that's my memory of it. To be fair, it was from watching the TV show again.
Yeah, thank you. That's
there were two bits in this. First of all, I may have this wrong actually. You did the £5,000 box trick. Did that go wrong one night?
Yes, it went wrong 2 nights. So the idea is, I've got a box that's covered up, and I say in it is it's either £500 in like a fan, or it's full of notes, and actually it's £5,000. And all you've got to do, someone in the audience, is guess which one you think it is. If you get it right, you can have it. You can have the money. And then there's various sort of back and forth teasing stuff with it throughout the second half, and at the end of throughout the first half, and then at the end of the first half, I asked them to make a final decision, and all things going well, of course, they get it wrong, and then one night they got it right, and it was £5,000, and there was no way I could get out of it. So. The ending of the and it turned out it was their birthday, so they were very happy with that. So that, and then everyone backstage was a bit like, oh fuck, that wasn't supposed to happen. I was like, I know, how do we do this? Because we couldn't give them the £5,000 because we needed it for the next night. So then they had to come backstage. We had to write them a check. They thought this was all like, very fishy, but obviously they did get it. And then it happened again later in the West End, exactly the same thing. It went wrong, but it was with it being £5,000 that I had to give them. By the time that had happened and I'd come backstage, because it was right at the end of the first half, so 10 seconds later I'm backstage, they'd had a whip round for me. I'm backstage. So yeah, that was but I remember in the when I see the coin in hand trick, which
it's become like a bit of a mentalism classic trick, hasn't it, off the back of you doing it?
I remember that was the first experience I had of that, actually, because I remember it took us a long time to come up with that trick and that plot. and you know it's a good one when it feels like it's been around for ages. It feels like a classic game, which hand as they call it. You know, it's that sort of the idea is to come up with something that feels so simple, and so anyway, came up with that, and within 6 months it was the old classic of mentalism available on every magic website, which is always a bit sort of galling. I've kind of got used to it since, but that was part of the opening of the first show, Derren Brown Live, and I would, on the final round, I wouldn't do anything to work out which hand it was in. I would simply guess, because I realised that me losing the 50 quid was at least as interesting and fun and certainly rewarding for the audience as
That's amazing, because you've just jogged my memory, and I always remember I could never figure out the last bit.
No, there you go.
Amazing.
There
That's
was
an amazing
method.
insight.
No method for the last bit.
Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing.
Okay.
That's brilliant. Of course, in that same show, there was, this is the one every magician, the gorilla moment.
Oh yes, the gorilla moment.
How much fun was that to do
every
night?
That was enormous fun, and I think we're going to do it in Broadway, so I won't say too much about it, but it was really, really good fun.
So of all the 7 shows that I've seen, there's one routine which is really, to me, I always remember as being the most powerful, and that was an enigma. You closed
no, go on.
The medallion.
The medallion, yeah, Grandpa's box.
I remember watching it. For me at the time, it was quite emotional because actually I just lost my granddad a little while earlier, so it was quite a powerful thing. Obviously, you did it every night, 100 times or so. Have you got any memories of doing that? Because you were effectively asking for someone in the audience who had lost a grandparent and brought them up on stage, and then you put them through a bit of an emotional thing. Do you have any memories of that?
I remember. Okay, so I remember, and again, this came from the idea of, so it's essentially it's a magic trick. It's the coin in nest of boxes.
Alcaran, isn't it? Is that
I think it probably is Alcaran. Yeah. So the thought was, how to, because it's a lovely trick. I think probably it was Andy that first suggested it, because he likes a nest of boxes trick. It's not quite, because I'd only ever really done close-up magic, so it wasn't quite something I had experience with myself. But there's something lovely about the object. Lovely about, a brandy balloon, whatever it is inside, but not quite really mentalism. So how do you make something like that is normally, a coin disappears and then it's inside a ball of wool, inside a glass, inside a box, inside another box, and so on. How do you make that into a piece of mentalism? Because it is unabashed a magic trick. So it sort of became about. So I think one thing you can do is you can look at the image of it and go, well, what is it? And there was something lovely about the idea of this ball of wool being. Someone in the front row taking the end of the very end of the wall, and the person on the stage holding the ball, and then the walls unravel but pass back across the audience, and that just felt like quite in a few of the shows where it's like, that's a really interesting image. There's something quite nice about that, just in that kind of ethereal sort of theatrical way. There's just something nice about that, and what is that? What could that mean? And it was sort of about people maybe being connected. So I think it might have started with that then became about, we're all connected by these things. If it wasn't for my granddad, who got me into magic, then I wouldn't be doing this. And all of that, is a magician's line very often about these, grandfathers that get us into magic. But my granddad had died, and I was very close to him. And although he didn't get me into magic, he was a huge fan of magic, and never got to see any of the shows, never got to see what I did. He died just before the first show went out. So there was some authenticity in that for me, even though the story wasn't quite right. Doing it every night, although I remember a lot of people being, moved by it on stage, I remember really enjoying doing it, enjoying performing it. My abiding memory, which I'll never forget, is, and if magicians watching it, they'll sort of appreciate what this is about, but I dropped the medallion. This is before anyone knows there's a medallion in play. I dropped it stage right, and it rolled right the way across the stage to the stage left wings. No one knows what it is at this point, but I'm chasing a very large coin across the stage, and there's nothing you can really do other than just not telegraph that it's a weird moment for anybody, in the hope that they might sort of forget it. But I'm literally having to run after it, and eventually I only catch up with it when it's sort of just about got into the wings, stage left. So I sort of picked it up and pretended to give it to somebody in the wings, made a remark about dropping change, and then just carried on with the routine. So that's sort of what I remember, sadly, more than the beauty of the beauty of the trick.
I think if we got 100 magicians in a room and asked them what the strongest thing is you've done, a lot of them would say the ending of Enigma.
Okay.
That's interesting. So do you not view it that way? Or do you consider it one of your stronger pieces?
Actually, the ending of that show, and I've had other things that are similar, is that and again, this is a burglass, essentially the fundamental structure of the trick is from David Burglass. Partly it's the nature of the trick, that it's a very layered, purposely very complex thing, because you're slightly baffled. I think part of its secret is that you're slightly baffled by, so what is it I've seen which lends you just to go, oh, it must be amazing, because everything's matching it must be amazing, even though if you sit and think about it, have I just seen the same thing twice? But then we took it and of course wanted to make more of it, which was a bit of a mistake, and what happened is it ended up being just, I think, too complicated. So this has happened with, I think, the sort of, was it the Dick Brain stuff I did in a later show? I can't remember, but there's quite a few things where the challenge has been to take out some of the magic, because you just become deadened to it, let alone confused by what the point is that you've just seen. So it's an interesting lesson that I always feel very, very strongly that if you're an audience watching a performer, it's all about you as a human being connecting to another human being, and it doesn't matter if they're a dancer or a magician or a ventriloquist or what. You just want to see a human being. It's what makes Nina Conti so amazing as a ventriloquist, I think. That she's a seemingly very natural, spontaneous. She's absolutely in the moment with it. You feel very connected to her. You feel like she's someone you could be sitting and talking to down the pub. She doesn't seem polished and distant and overly rehearsed or any of those things that, nothing slick about her. And I think those are the things we really kind of connect to. And likewise with magic, we get, as magicians, we can fall in love with how layered and baffling we can make a trick. But that's not actually, bizarrely, what people ultimately want. Obviously we've got to do that and we've got to deliver it, but ultimately it has to come back down to just a human being, which means you've got to understand the basic drama of what's going on. You've got to understand what they're trying to do, that person on stage is trying to achieve. You want to feel that they're in it, experiencing it. And when you've got a trick that's so complicated and is only about, I did this, you lose that connection, and it suffered from that. So we did a lot of removal of layers of that trick, of what is already a very layered trick, because it just ended up being too complex.
That's interesting. I did not expect that answer, actually. I thought you'd just be incredibly proud of it.
Oh no! Well, by the end, I love what I've seen it back a few times, and I think by the end it was. I think it was a good ending. I was very happy with it. I'm not saying it was like that throughout. It was like that at the start. So we did a lot of work, and I think when we came back to start the second leg of that tour, so the second year, I think we stripped more out. So it's not that I don't like it. I think it's a fun trick. It just took a lot of work to get it to the point that it was right. And bizarrely, it wasn't about making it more magical. It was about making it less magical, which then strangely makes it more magical.
I find it really interesting that you would revisit it all when you do the second leg of a tour. By then, you've probably done 50 shows. A lot of magicians would go, "It's done." I've heard a rumor that
taking notes on the last night.
Yeah,
absolutely. We've 3 nights before the end of Miracle, I've just done. Andrew came up, and maybe it was 2 nights before. And we were doing notes and making changes then. And the last night of, I can't remember which one it was, it might have been Enigma, one of the shows, Andy came to the last night. And then literally there were no more shows, and we were still talking afterwards about what we could do to tweak it. Both laughing because there would be no show in which we could tweak it. But that's it. I mean, my mind boggles at the idea of, Copperfield and others just doing 10 years of show. I mean, the challenge as a performer is to love it each night. Again, to be in just the, for it to be fresh, for every time you laugh at something on stage, you're laughing because you genuinely find it funny at that moment, and that's the challenge. That's the goal of it. And really, the only way you can do that is to consistently be introducing challenges, because there's a sociologist called Michael Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book called Flow, and in it he talks about whether you're a surfer or a chess player or a performer or a pianist or whatever, there's a kind of a zone that you get into when, if you imagine a graph. So one axis, your x-axis, says it is your challenges that you face. The other axis, the y-axis, is the skills that you have. And what you want is your activity to take you on a diagonal, an x equals y diagonal, where the skills you've got roughly meet the challenges that you're facing. If it's too much of a challenge and your skills don't meet them, then you become anxious. If your skills outweigh the challenges, you become bored. But if you can get in the middle, regardless of what the activity is, people report a sort of very happy state, a kind of you lose all sense of time, you feel like you're at your best and the best possible version of yourself and all those things. And so likewise, if you're doing a show every night, what you can't have is for it to start to be boring or start to feel like you've done it 100 times or 200 times or God, thousands of times if you're doing it for 10 years. So for me, those things are really important, not just about it's not just about getting notes and a director saying, oh, you can do this better. It's actually the very essence of why I go out every night is to enjoy it and to for it to work. So I need to know after a while that this bit's slipping a little bit, or why don't we try this, or why don't you, or it might just be a new gag that becomes a joy because you want to put that new thing in or try that new thing out, and that's is very important. So I don't see any reason why you'd be less inclined to do that just before the end of the tour than you would at the beginning. It might be more necessary at the beginning because there are bigger changes that need to be made, but then as you go along, you want to keep finding them every night.
But you're a human being, and you do so many shows. There must be nights where you're tired, poorly, exhausted. What techniques have you found that help you pick up your game for the 3,000 people in the theatre?
I think there are. Well, the reason why you work with directors and you have a sort of a script, even though I never really had a script, but it is word for word the same every night. I'm going out and I'm saying the same words, and if it sounds like I'm making it up, that's because I'm acting that. I mean, it is. I'm not going out and just sort of, just bouncing through things. That means that even if you go out and you're feeling ill, or you've just had terrible news before you walk out on stage, the words that you are saying and the actions that are going with it have been worked on and got just right and a note perfect. So even if you don't feel the show has really flown that night, you're doing a really good job, and should get all the reactions that you want, and everything's sort of in place. So that's just about being utterly prepared with it, having a real muscle memory for the show, and knowing that all those things are really important. So if it's a bad night, it doesn't read. Then when it's a good night, and it's not about feeling good, because it's just about, as I said, just being in it. When you something happens that's slightly throws you, but in a good way, something that suddenly throws you back into the absolute here and now, and this moment that's happening now with this person. If you imagine if you go and see a show and something goes a bit wrong, or the magician suddenly, or a performer suddenly has to deal with the night we went, this happened, or that suddenly everyone's very alive and alert to that moment because they know this doesn't happen every night, and that's what you should try and do throughout it, and you just do it by being in the moment as you would if something went wrong. There are some sort of tricks and things that not magic tricks, but kind of little performance tricks and things that are where you can remind yourself, or bits that you enjoy that you look forward to, and then so you're always in the moment for that bit because you just really enjoy them. Strangely for me, I always find the show totally rests for me on my voice. So
you've had some vocal problems over the years, haven't you?
Nothing huge. I've had to cancel a couple of shows, but it's if you're doing a one-man show every night with no understudy, you have to look after your voice, which sadly is why I can't go out and do signings after the shows now. But that, for me, if my voice is strong, then I feel the show is strong. If the voice feels croaky or weak, I feel the show is sort of croaky or weak. If it's strained, I feel the show is strained. And again, none of that actually translates to anybody, which is why your own experience on stage is not a good reflection of how the show is. But the voice is a huge, huge thing for me, and my experience of it, and therefore how much in the moment and all the rest of it comes strangely from how much I can just relax and let my voice do its job.
I'm going to ask you a tough question
now.
Okay. My listeners love these, by the way, when I ask these.
You haven't asked about Steve Wyrick and his helicopter illusion yet, which I'm sort of slightly disappointed by.
can we get to him? We'll get to him shortly.
Okay,
all right.
Yeah.
We've had Sharky and Long on the podcast, and
Sharky and Long. You have to remind me.
well, this is really something interesting actually, and that is that they worked with.
Were they the Crime Busters of the Sea?
I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
all
I
right,
think they were your
sorry.
co-writers actually.
Ah, yes.
And
yes.
what I want to ask you is that Andy obviously didn't work with you on Svengali. He did Enigma and then came back later on. You worked with Sharky and Long on Svengali. You won an Olivier Award with that show.
Yes.
Why did you not work with Sharky and Long again, or why have you not?
God. Well, I have obviously worked with them a lot, and worked with them a lot on the TV. So it's not like we haven't worked together. I think what happened with Svengali, it was such a joy to make that show. It really was. It was a delight. But it was a very different way of working. There was Polly Morgan, who was lovely and brilliant, who directed it. Who's not a magician. She knows more about magic now, but at the time I think it's fair to say, didn't know a thing about magic. So in order to provide the sort of magic voices and magic heads, I got Stephen and Ian in for that, Sharky and Long in for that. So it became a much more sort of group devised piece, and I kind of felt like quite a few things that needed work throughout. We made some quite big changes in the second leg of the tour, and I think what it didn't have in quite the same way as previous shows, that it was sort of felt like me and Andy, was a clear sense of sort of ownership of that show and of the material. Not in terms of any sort of like intellectual property, but just a clear one person's vision, because it wasn't. It was definitely a sort of a group thing, and it was a really lovely way of working. But in terms of having like one director who can come in night after night and go do this, change that, well, Polly could absolutely do that, but in order for the magic stuff to be part of that discussion, that involved other people too. So it was just a different way of working, which it was a delight, but I just think in the end it felt like need to go back to just one person I've worked with for a long time. We got all this, I say one person, Andrew as well, but that kind of the sense of just a clarity of ownership, and it's not for a second to in any way take away from Sharky or Long or Polly or anybody, because we all loved that show and I loved doing it. But it's tough, and I whatever show I do, I always feel it's my favourite. Always feel it's the best one I've done at the time, because again I think you sort of have to. But then just talking about it, getting ready for the next year. I think actually Andrew and Michael felt it perhaps more strongly than I did, that we should go back to the old model, that something in the mix had got a bit lost because it was a group of us coming up with it. But as you said, got an Olivier, so it was still a delight to do, and a successful show.
You handpick your team yourself, the people you go on tour with, and I think there's 6 or 7 of you that go on the road. Why on earth would anyone want to spend 7 months with James Went?
Yes, no, that was a terrible mistake, and I think in all the years of doing the show, he's the only person. Just the levels of racism and misogyny, it's just not pleasant. Now, what I've always done, James is amazingly lovely, and what I've always done from day one, so Coops, my PA, who you met when you came here today, he used to live up above me when I lived in the flat, and he was a student up above, and we became friends, and then he started taking me to gigs, and then I offered him his job as a PA when I moved to London. So he was coming on tour then as a sort of the guy that was maybe filming on stage and moving props around and so on. And then it grew from that, but because none of us were from a theatre background, I always just asked my friends that I thought would be nice to be with for an extended period of time. And I've generally worked with magicians rather than ASMs, as they're known, assistant stage managers, who might be working on any number of musicals or other shows, because there's just a sort of a kind of a loyalty to the work and a love of a real desire to make it go well. I think you're more likely to have if you're a magician loving the show and loving rather than if you're just a professional backstage person who could really be any show. So I've just over the years, I've loved that. And James, so it's been James and Ollie Mealing and Coops have been with me for a long time. Anthony Waldron, who's now a producer and genius, lovely man. God, I'm sure other magicians that I've forgotten about. It's difficult also. It's difficult finding people that can just come away with you for 7 months. which is another reason why magicians, because you want magicians that are
Talking about magicians got nothing going on, have they?
They've got to be good enough, but not so good that they're working.
What you mean is not insane, is what you mean? Not
insane, easy to be with, and I've been so lucky with that, because it is it's a lot of time you spend with people, and you've it's not just that I've got to get on with them, everyone's got to get on well, because if two people in the group don't like each other, that's going to make everybody else's life miserable. So yeah, and also there are others as well, but I'm only naming sort of magicians there that I've been on tour with. Obviously the rest of the group, particularly this year as well, has been a delight. Absolutely lovely.
Forgive me, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I consider myself a broadcast journalist.
I consider you by now a broadcast journalist as well, yes.
And my research has been known to freak people out sometimes, and this might freak you out, but in Infamous, there's a part at the end of the first half where you invite the audience on stage, and they are seated.
Mm-hmm, yes.
There were 52 seats there.
There were.
That was going to be a card trick.
It was going to be a card trick. Yes, this was the mediumship section of that show. So this happens a lot in the shows, particularly in that first week. I was talking about going out and doing a different show. It feels like night after night in those early days until we nail what the show is. So there are 52 chairs on stage, and I get a bunch of people up, and I do a card at any number routine on stage, and I did it for Stand Up to Cancer one year with Martin Freeman and Amanda, his wife, or partner, oh God. So people may have seen that. So that was the trick, and the kicker to that trick. So the trick is that the card named is at the correct number. The kicker was then everybody behind is asked to stand up, and they've all got envelopes, big envelopes stuck underneath their chairs, and we do a count along the rows to the same number, so the 25th person, whatever the number was that was chosen, opens their envelope, and sure enough, it's there's the card, a jumbo version of the card under their seat, and it worked. I mean, it was fine, and it was a great card trick, but the feeling was it's a lot of card stuff in this half, and it's sort of dwarfing everything else, and it just the tone of it didn't quite feel right. So that afternoon we were looking at what else can we do? We've got all these chairs on, so we've got to use them. If we're not going to do this card trick, what are we going to do with all these people that come up on stage? So we said, what about some mediumship? Because that's what it looked like. It looked like a studio audience for something. So what about doing that? So that night I tried that. So that was like a just got to seat of your pants, grab your balls and do it kind of thing, and it felt good. And then I don't know if we did it on the first night, or certainly, but if not the first night, by the second, it became about me debunking it as I was doing it, and saying, your grandma's telling me, she's not, I'm making this up, I'm lying to you, but she's telling you that you got a dog called Doodle and you live, so really sort of powerful information, but I'm kind of debunking it as I'm doing it, and then that became really interesting, and I think it became maybe one of the best things in that show, but it came out of a panicky, what can we do? It's a bit like in Infamous, counting the rice. There was a bit at the end of that show when I'd been doing that stunt where you have eggs and rolls of card, and you put the eggs and you balance the eggs and you knock the card out the way.
Yeah, like a broom, and I know what you mean.
Which is like
they fall in the pint glasses.
They fall in the pint glasses, and by all accounts, this is a trick that a barely gestated fetus could do. I mean, it couldn't be any. I could not do it. The eggs were going. It's the finale of the show. Eggs are going everywhere. I couldn't do it. So of course, I ended up just hating it, dreading the fact that it was coming, and then of course failing partly because I wasn't properly committing to it because I was hating it. So we just, in the end, I said, look, can we just take this fucking thing out? I hate it. So we needed something else. And I believe it was Andy who just said, what about we throw a bunch of rice down and you count, you just look at it and you can count how many bits there are. Either way, it was like one afternoon and we did it that night. And again, weirdly ended up being a really memorable thing in the show. And a bit like the coin in the hand thing. Again, those ideas are best when they just feel they're so simple. There's nothing convoluted about them, which is why that especology routine that we were talking about at the end of Enigma did feel convoluted and had to be stripped down, because ultimately it's, if you can't tell yourself what's happened, then it's not a very good trick as an audience member. And the clearer your story is, like you counted all the rice, is so simple and clear that it just works better than. And then she picked these, and then that matched with that, and then they did that. I don't know what happened, but those things are just never going to be as good.
I hope this doesn't annoy you, but actually my most memorable part of Infamous is the opening 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not an effect. It's just you talking.
Coming
it's an
out and
opening
talk-
monologue.
yeah,
You
yeah.
sit on the chair, you talk
Yeah.
about coming out and about how we're all stuck in our own heads.
Yeah.
I think it's one of your most astonishing performances, actually.
Oh,
it's so
thank you.
powerful. It's just 3 minutes long. Was that a big decision for you to talk about that on stage? You talked about it in a few interviews and papers, but...
It was born not out of any desire to talk about coming out. It was more born out of how do we start the, whatever it is, 5th, 6th show, and have it feel different. And to come out and just sit down and talk would be the height of arrogance unless you've sort of earned it. So I think trying to do that in a first show would be wrong. But there was a feeling that I think, by now, we've sort of earned it. And the reason, if it does feel a bit disarming or even, a bit sort of brave or whatever, it's because it is, it could be a very wrong thing to do. But I think if you've sort of earned it, then it's okay. So it felt like a really, it was, all the other shows had started really with like a game. Like I come out, right, everybody stand up, let's all do this.
Where's my shoe?
Where's my shoe? Or coin in hand, or, big sort of fun, silly thing like that. And it was a decision to make the tone of it from the start different, so that if you had seen a number of shows before, it didn't just feel like, oh, here we go again. But interestingly, when I'd been asked about it in interviews, it was also, why did you feel like you needed to talk about coming out like that, and was it therapeutic to do it every night? And of course, it's not really. The reality is that's not why you make those choices. It'd be very weird to build a show around me wanting to tell people that I'm gay every night when that it was sort of out there. That'd be a very bad choice to make, because that's not really what doing a show is about. So the correct reason and the right reason was to make it compelling.
So when you look back over these 7 shows, if I had to push you for one routine in those 7 shows that's your favourite, what would you say? What's your answer?
Oh, God.
That's a really tough question, that must be.
I love the painting in the second leg of Svengali.
Yeah, because I saw that show twice.
Yeah.
And I saw it in Oxford, which I think is really your first proper stop of the tour.
Yeah.
It wasn't there, and I saw it in Aylesbury
And then it was in that, yeah.
I was astonished how much the show had changed, actually.
Yeah, we did change that a lot.
You work on that show every night, don't you? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we did work. We worked more on that one, because I think that was the most kind of, as it went on, we put the most amount of work into it. Andrew came over from America, and we changed a lot. So I think the second leg of it was more successful than the first leg, I think, as a show. So I loved that. I really liked, but I didn't particularly enjoy doing it because it was messy. I like tricks that feel very elegant to do, not elegant like in poncing around elegant, but they're neat and satisfying to perform. And because that one was messy and there's paint everywhere, a bit like doing the broken glass, I never quite really loved doing it. But I thought it was a very good piece and probably the best thing in the show. So I loved that. I love doing the Spirit Cabinet in Enigma. Sometimes there are just moments of method that are just a delight. They could become your favourite moment in the show, but they're just simply like a bold, beautiful bit of method that where you've done nothing, but it's created a massive thing that won't even be realised until sometime
so you don't have
later.
to tell us the method, but can you tell us one bit of that?
One bit in that was there's a routine at the start of I think it's Infamous, which is a word predicted on my back. Isn't it? God, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, that's right. I've got a prediction on my back. Somebody names any word they like, and then I take my jacket off, and or on the back is pinned a big prediction. It says what the word is, and that was to me an example of like hugely satisfying, bold, ridiculous methods that no one else would sort of appreciate, because the point of it is that no one would sense it, but it was just a huge delight to do. So that, purely from a methodological point of view, was lovely. What else? I think that thing I said earlier on with the mediumship in the very first show, of them describing this friend of mine that had passed on, that felt strong. I love the thing with the gorilla, but again, sometimes what is great material in the show isn't necessarily what you particularly enjoy yourself performing. So yeah, but I suppose those are there was something great about doing the Spirit Cabinet. So I'd seen Falkenstein and Willard do it, other people do it, and that thing when you're just on the edge of your seat hoping you're going to catch something, some little glimpse of something going on, and that was a pleasure.
Pulling back the curtain quicker and quicker every night. Is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
yeah, exactly.
you've obviously done thousands of shows now, and you've been to all the venues in the UK. I've got to ask you, do you have a favourite venue?
Favourite venues? That can depend on a lot of things. It can sometimes depend on the audiences. It can depend on the acoustics of the building. I think as an overall favourite, probably Bristol, because I love the city. I lived there for a long time. The audiences hit that particular combination of...
You perform at the Hippodrome there, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, first of all, I used to go to that theatre a lot when I lived there, so it's nice also to go there. The backstage crew, very, very friendly. The acoustics are great. You can kind of hear everybody in the audience. That's another thing. Sometimes you can have 3,000 people, but you can only hear the first 3 or 4 rows. So it's like doing a rehearsal every night. It's not actually just not very nice. But the Hippodrome's a lovely sound. And there are other cities as well, Edinburgh, Dublin, others that hit this particular note of they're sort of bright, like it's a university city. They're bright and they're kind of not reserved. They're sort of, up for it. There's a nice feeling of community in the audience. There is a sense of like, come on then, show us what you've got, which is a nice feeling. Because some other cities where people maybe there haven't been generations of people growing up there. They're lovely, but there's nothing going on between anybody. It's just they're quietly sitting and watching and showing their appreciation, but there isn't that extra spark of energy. So I'd say Bristol's probably my favourite.
Looking back over your thousands of shows, is there one night that stands out for any particular reason?
A few things stick out. The guy that started throwing up and couldn't stop in Something Wicked This Way Comes. I played a subliminal film to the audience, and I said, at the end of this, 4 of you will want to come up on stage. So I play the film, and I just wait for those 4 people, whoever they are, to come up on stage. And this guy came up and just started throwing up all over me, all over the other punters. And
wow.
then I sent him back, and he was throwing up over people in the audience. That was memorable. That was at St David's Hall in Cardiff. And then... No, Belfast Waterfront, I think. It was one of those concert halls I hadn't done for a while, but that was something special. In this last show in Swansea, so this was in Miracle, a guy found himself responding to the kind of invitation to come forward for the faith healing. Obviously something had shifted in him, and but he got it into his head that the whole of the show was about him. This whole thing had been set up for him, that I'd sort of somehow got at him. And he got quite violent, got quite aggressive. We had to stop the show. So he came up on stage, sort of pushed his way up. And, which again, I love those moments when they happen, because again, it's suddenly very electric. And I can normally just click my fingers and that person will, collapse to the floor, because they're so responsive anyway, which is what has got them into that position, that it's I remember one night I was up in the balcony going and seeing somebody who I think had slightly kind of responded slightly oddly to some suggestion that I'd done. It wasn't really even hypnosis, but they'd kind of responded a bit oddly. So I'm up seeing them in the balcony. Somebody down in the stalls, who's standing and sort of, zonked out, starts to kind of come to and is acting a bit oddly. And from the balcony, I just called over to them. I said, look at me. I clicked my fingers, and from that, from the top of the balcony down to the stalls, this guy just collapsed in the stalls. And I remember that moment. That was exciting. I thought, that's going to look really good. Yes, this guy thinking it was all about him. That's right. So normally I can click my fingers. I know that'll be fine, but he didn't. And I eventually caught up with him the next day, and he was suffered from paranoia, and he hadn't taken his Prozac that day, and understandably, if that's the case and you're in a show like that, you might start to think, hang on a minute. I mean, that feeling that sometimes people have that everyone must be a stooge had blown up into everybody's in on this apart from me. So I met up with him the next day and made sure he was all right. But those moments like that are kind of things that suddenly are, electric. But we had to stop the show twice, and if anyone's seen the show, right at the very end. I also remember in Liverpool, and again, right at the end of the show, there's quite a sort of a touching speech that I'm doing at the end. I mean, you've seen the show, and I'm holding a watch up to the camera, and it is literally the last 10 seconds of the show. And I just hear this, Derren! 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 So I sort of look out, and there's a woman at the front. She's walked down to the front of the stalls, and she's like, Derren, come on, no one's welcomed you to Liverpool, let's give him a hand, And she starts like a round of applause. And the audience, not sure if it's part of the show or not. Right at the very end, so that was surreal. So yeah, I think those are the things that you remember when things just go a bit odd.
So you're off to Broadway. That's
the
plan.
That's the plan.
I've got to ask you, why? What is it in you that wants to go to America and give it a go out there?
Again, never any ambition. These things should never be mistaken for any desire to conquer anywhere. But it would be really good fun to live out in New York for a bit. I mean, whatever, 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is, and go and do a show on Broadway. That would be lovely. It'd be lovely in a way that sort of Vegas probably wouldn't be. It wouldn't suit me as much. But New York's a nice place, and what a lovely thing to do and have that opportunity. So there's no nothing really beyond that. I try and make all my choices based on how much fun or something will be for the experience of doing it. There's never any grand plan.
Every magician wonders this about you. Are you running out of material yet? 7 shows in.
It's more difficult with stage shows than it is with TV shows. So TV shows are always driven by kind of a thing that feels important to me at the time, and then you try and find a hook, a really good dramatic hook that people will watch. And then the thing that feels important becomes the kind of subtext for it and the reason for doing it. And that can sort of work indefinitely to an extent. Whereas with the stage shows, you're a bit more bound by what can be done on stage, and the fact there's only, really so many tricks, and you're finding variations on similar ideas. It is more of a challenge to keep it fresh. But again, I think that comes down to not necessarily the tricks, but it does come down to what the heart of the show is. And I think as long as the heart of the show, if it comes from somewhere that is rooted in all the right things, is rooted in something that's sort of intelligent and hopefully layered and worth saying, and you hit that note, then that's the main thing. And then you obviously have to make sure that the tricks feel fresh, and that the finale, that's obviously the most difficult bit, is always trying to over deliver on what the end of the show is, so that people go out not going, yeah, that was alright, but hopefully go out going, oh god, that was more than they expected. And that is tough. But I think the answer is never to try and outdo yourself or go, what's bigger and better. The answer is always to start with, what's the point of the show, what's the reason for doing it. Like a lot of the TV shows that I've done have been quite sort of quiet, and like after Apocalypse I did the thing with the pensioners stealing the painting from the gallery. It's quite a quiet sort of show, but again, it sort of came from somewhere that felt like it was something worth saying, and you don't have to just think bigger and better. So hopefully that allows for some longevity if your agenda isn't just about yourself. Penn and Teller have done that very well, if you think about it. They've never been about themselves looking clever. They've always had something to say about something else, and they've had this amazing long career, and they're just as cool now, if not cooler than they were at the start.
I took some questions from our listeners.
Oh, right, excellent.
Some of them are awful.
Okay.
Don't worry though, I've edited those out.
Understandably.
So, what's your favourite magic book? That's from Mark Watson. That's a good question, actually.
Mark Watson, the comedian?
No, just some guy with Watson. A bowler hat on.
Oh god, they're all downstairs. I can't even look at them. Well, it was Mark Wilson's, confusingly, Complete Course in Magic that got me into it when I was a kid. I loved the Tommy Wonder books as an adult. I haven't read magic books for so long that I can't really say beyond those two that were, certainly Mark Wilson was the most formative. Yeah.
I don't understand this question, but
Okay.
It got 7 likes.
Okay, well,
So
then
it's
it
got to
must
be a good
yeah,
question.
Okay.
Someone called Max Francis has asked if you can do your Stewie Griffin impression.
Oh, Brian, look, I'm a stripper. I'm just not quite warmed up for that. I haven't done it for a while. That's thank you, Max.
Toby Davis, if you didn't end up being a magician, what job do you think you would have done?
I don't think I'd have been a lawyer, but that's where I was heading. So I suppose I would have been a solicitor. That is, but that's where things were heading. But I can't imagine it. I've always painted, so hopefully, that would have been nice if I'd have been an artist. These are my paintings, by the way, which won't translate very well on the podcast. But
Oh, they're amazing, aren't they?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Tom Defoe, if you're out and about with friends or something and you decide to perform an effect, what effect do you perform?
I don't, and I haven't for years. Partly because I've never quite found the sort of perfect impromptu thing, but also I used to always have tricks on me. I used to always be that guy that had to do tricks to impress people, and I've sort of weirdly, though I now do that for a living, but in terms of real life, have moved away so much from that, and I don't like the sort of dynamic that it creates. I don't like, particularly when it's mentalism, because you're asking people to really buy into that as well. It's not just a quick trick, and I think the dynamic of control that creates is so anathema to how I actually think is nice to be and good to be in real life, that I can't quite marry the two things together. So I don't, but I always feel at I've got a couple of things I can do at a push if somebody really insists, but I don't really I don't like it. I've got quite a good occasionally like a sort of patio force after dinner sort of thing that sometimes I'll do because it doesn't involve. I don't have to have any props with me. I can do quite a good thing with just the objects on the table that's slightly improvised, and I quite enjoy that.
The best question of the lot came from Christian Fletcher. Wants to know
Good name, Christian Fletcher.
Yeah, he wants to know your thoughts on Steve Wyrick. And that got 6 likes, that question.
Were they all from
Admittedly,
you?
one was from me.
One was from
me.
you.
Your thoughts on the helicopter illusion in particular?
Well,
don't you think that maybe you should end the Broadway show with a helicopter illusion?
Well, it combines helicopters and also combines the magic of illusion. I've never seen it.
Oh, I'll show it to you
and
before I leave.
Don't know who he is, so
It's the best helicopter illusion without
does it
question.
appear, disappear?
It appears, yeah, at the beginning of the show. He arrives by helicopter. Well, he doesn't, obviously.
So that's quite a bold opening, isn't it? It's quite a bold opening.
I know, but when you're going to close with a appearing aeroplane, then you've got to start with a helicopter, haven't you?
That is good. He should finish with making a toy helicopter appear at the very end for like a really the worst possible choice. If you started with a real one.
Mike Michaels makes a toy helicopter.
Who does?
Mike Michaels, an illusion builder in Vegas. He makes a toy helicopter that magically appears. DeCruz found it on the internet. It's really good. You should maybe look at that for the next show.
Okay.
How many people say that to you, by the way? They go, "Hey, Derren, I've got an idea for you." That must annoy you, right?
God, there was a guy that used to come and see the show. He might listen to this, and apologies if he is, because he'll find it excruciating. But it was years ago, and I'm sure it's much nicer now. But he used to. There's a real thing of magicians giving you notes for the shows afterwards on what you could do better, which I'm sure you don't get if you're a comedian. But this guy turned up, and he used to come year after year and do this, and it used to drive me mad. And then one year he gave me a big letter. The first third was how he thought it was all done. So his trick by trick, how the methods were done, including giant moving magnets under the stage and all this stuff. The second third was just how the show could be improved. And then the last one was a sort of bit of a CV. He'd love a job on the tour, and if I could just let him know either way.
Amazing. I've got it. This is the big question that everyone's wanted me to ask you, because you've never spoken about this, I don't think.
Ooh.
Derren clones. I mean, there's a load. You've inspired basically a generation of Derren Brown magicians out there.
Yeah.
You know, some of which go to great lengths to, be like you. How does that make you feel?
Okay, that's a really good question. I haven't really spoken much about it. So it's complicated, and it changes as I've sort of grown up. There's no doubt that when you put, months of work into something, like for example that coin in hand thing, that was the first time it really happened, and then other people just start doing it and they take your lines and everything, that is galling because you didn't come up with it on a whim. A group of you sat around and coming up with that thing that feels really simple, and exactly what will make it catch on and popular is it's often very, very difficult. So no doubt that it's galling, at least at the start, and then as you get used to it, you can get out of that initial thing, that initial bad feeling. I think the reality is copying another performer is a good thing. It is part of the creative process. I did it when I started. You have your role models, the people that inspire you. And
who did you copy?
I sort of copied. Well, the only performer I knew and the one that got me into it was Martin Taylor, who was the hypnotist that I'd seen, and the only hypnotist that I'd seen. So when I first started doing hypnosis, he was the only person I had to go on. I didn't even realise at the time that was a bit of a no-no. Didn't exactly steal his material, but it was the only framework that I had, so I might as well have been stealing his material. I didn't know any better. So I think that's absolutely part of the process. So you should copy, and you should, ape those people. Where it's questionable, I mean, I've seen a number of quite well-known mentalists now that would absolutely claim to be very much not like me. I think if that sort of said that, and I've seen them on TV go out and do stuff that to them maybe does feel very different, but it's like, and I always get furious emails from Andy going, "Can't fucking believe it! That's our lines. That's our." But the thing is, like Andy and I, more than anybody, when you know what you've come up with, and when you know what it was like, there were 4 mentalists, whatever it was, before I started doing it. So that way of doing mentalism was stuff that we all came up with together. That little, not the 4 other mentalists, but me and Andy and Andrew, we sort of came up with this this thing, and I wrote an essay in Pure Effect about emphasize the process of your mentalism. A mentalism trick isn't turning around a pad and you've written down the thing that someone else was thinking of. It's how you got there. Even if you got the word wrong at the end, what's interesting is what were you doing? So, holding onto someone's hand and reading their little signals from their fingers or little cues here and there, that was all part of, what I brought to it. But the thing is, I know that because that's stuff we came up with. But for younger mentalists, because that's all they've sort of known and seen, it probably just does feel like, well, that's just what that is. So the variations that they make will feel very different to them, whereas for me, an older mentalist, they'll know that, well, that's from what you guys came up with. So it's sort of difficult, but it's sort of unavoidable. I think it's just part of there's a million different types of magicians out there, so there's lots of different types of magic that you can copy or find your home in, or things that will appeal to you. With mentalism, there should be just as many. There should be as many different ways of doing it as there are mentalists, but that's it is asking a lot. And some of the best mentalism I've seen, I remember seeing, I can't remember the names, I think there were two Dutch brothers, or they were playing brothers, and it's a two-person act. The guy on stage is playing autistic, and the guy in the audience is going around holding people's objects, and he's naming what those are, but it's done as a sort of autistic savant, and it was astonishing. And that's a very different way of doing it. There are lots of different ways of doing it. I'm surprised, of course, I remember when young magicians weren't familiar with Paul Daniels, and now young magicians aren't particularly familiar with David Blaine necessarily. And of course I've grown up throughout all of that, but if you're much younger, you sort of haven't. So if you've grown up and any mentalism you've seen is, me doing my stuff, largely, then there's sort of no reason why you wouldn't think, well, that's just how it's done, and not necessarily look outside that. So it's lovely to see when people do find their own thing. It was galling at the start to have stuff just stolen and copied, but, ultimately it's people doing tricks, isn't it? It's not really that important, and I think, and also it's very important in life. What is important is to realise that what's out of your control genuinely doesn't matter. It is fine. It does not matter, really. If someone's... it's a terrible thing to say, because we should not steal each other's material, but it's not the end of the world, and you can drive yourself mad. At the end of the day, it's entertainment, and it's fun, and it's a really nice job to have, and that's always going to happen, and it's going to happen if you're sort of up at the top of your particular game. And it's more important to me that I make it doesn't bother me, and that's my choice, isn't it? Whether if something bothers me or not, that's up to me. It's not whether they're stealing the material, it's whether them doing that bothers me. So I just decide to be sort of flattered by it and not worry about it. And sometimes I have to stick my fingers in my ears when other magicians go, oh, they're just ripping you off, because I if I let that thought stick in too much, then I could start to get a bit mad and bitter in my old age, which would be horrible. So yeah, it's up to me, isn't it?
There are a lot of people listening to this right now who have always wanted to hear you talk about that. So thank you so much. I think that's the perfect way to end this interview. Derren, this has been another thing I will never forget. So thank you so much.
Oh, this has been an absolute real delight, and I just hope it hasn't gone on for too long for people, because this has been quite a mammoth chat, hasn't it? But it's been very lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Snowden, Edward Snowden.
Right, okay.
You don't know who Edward Snowden is?
No idea.
You're shitting me.
No idea.
You're kidding me.
I don't live in Russia. Why would I know?
It's not right. This has been going on for 3 or 4 years, possibly 3. Who knows? Years.
Why is there a big bowl on the table?
Wow. Harry de Cruz used to keep a list of all your cock-ups.
Don't tell me. If this is the classic strangers in post-it notes, I'm going to be furious.
It is.
So I've listened to many of your podcasts.
You?
Of course, I've enjoyed lots. Yeah.
What's your favourite episode? Favourite episode?
Moving on.
Can we please hear the catchphrase? Please.
I say the magic words. Piff puff poof.
I'm just adjusting to a life without Paul, and some days I cope well, and other days it's not that I ever completely fall to pieces, but I have my emotional moments where I really need to think about him.
To just stop the camera, take somebody out of a box, start the camera again, and run over it with a car, that's just plain cheating.
I'm going to extend the hand of friendship, Barry, if that's alright.
Okay.
I bought you a little gift. It's a Krispy Kreme donut for you.
Krispy Kreme donut.
There we go.
Oh, thanks.
Also, I've spared no expense there. That's the one with the jam in. So,
The one with the jam.
Yeah.
Almost to support or peddle epistemological agenda and the naturalist, the naturalist reductionist agenda.
Only's banned for life.
Steve Wyrick.
Helicopters.
So that was my favourite part of the series so far. It's been an incredible ride. Sincere thanks to all of my guests who have sat in my hot seat this series. Thank you to you for listening and for pressing the download button. I sincerely hope these podcasts have improved your magic and entertained you in one way or another. For the final time, I'm about to ride off into the sunset and wrap this podcast up, but before I do, I would like to dedicate Series 3 to the legendary Paul Daniels. My name is Richard Young. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye, everybody.